Welcome to Portland. This is our last meeting of the year, as well as part of our meeting is our annual meeting, which is really exciting. It has 2 quick agenda items, so that should be exciting. I want to welcome you all. Thank you all for attending. We're going to start this morning with introductions, and then we'll have our vendor spotlight. My name is Colin Walsh. I'm from RSU 57, which is the towns of Alfred, Limerick, Lyman, Newfield, Shapley, and Waterboro. And I'm president of MaineASBO, and want to thank you for being here today. We're going to start in the back corner up there. If you can stand up, introduce yourselves, let us know your name and what town and school district you represent. That would be great. Go ahead.
Heidi Cisco, ASBO April, that oversees MSAD 31, which is Howland, Enfield, Passamaquoddy, Maxfield, and Edinburgh, and MSAD 41, which is Milo, LaGrange, and Bradford.
Shirley Weaning, RSU 87, Carmel and Levan.
Katie Worley, RSU 25, Westport, Orland, Verona, and Prospect.
Jamie Youngblood, Herman School Department.
Shauna Stockford, Sherman School Department. Chris Franklin, RSU 22. I've only been there in a month, so this is like a pop quiz. That's where I work. Winterford.
Welcome. Next table over. You guys negotiate. Who's going to start?
Jennifer Fuller, MSAD 58, Kingfield, Avon, Philip Strong. Laura White, RSU 73, Jay Livermore, Livermore Falls.
Crystal Flag, RSU 73. Gabrielle Kroll, MSAD 52, Turner Green Leeds.
Sheila Bedard, MSAD 17, and there's 8 towns.
Carrie Colley, MSAD 17, it's Harrison, Hebron, Norway, Otisfield, Oxford, Paris, Waterford, and West Paris.
Over here.
David Pascal, MSAD 15, Great New Gloucester.
Jennifer Hannigan, MSAD 15, Great New Gloucester, we have the easy.
Belinda Waterhouse, I work for Northport, Monhegan, and Matinicasab.
Michelle Grant, RSU 12. I have Palermo, Whitefield, Windsor, Chelsea, Somerville, all the Westport Islands.
Mine's easy. Christine Bishop, Amherst, Bay.
Adam.
Adam Hansen, Lewiston.
Bill Grant, also Lewiston.
Jackie Smith, also Lewiston.
Kate Bolton, Scarborough.
Candy Aberze, St. George, MSU.
Dawn, get your table going.
Tina Plummer, MSAD 6. Buxton, Holliston, Kingston, and Brian.
Dawn Cooler, also MSAD 6.
Ida Davenport, MSAD 6.
Good morning, I'm Sarah King with the Easton School Department.
Zach.
Zach Harding, Yarmouth School Department.
Cheryl Fournier, Sanford School Department.
Sherry Moody, Midcoast School of Technology.
Peter Nielsen, Bristol, South Bristol, Damascotta, Newcastle, Bremen, Jefferson and Noblesboro, Great Salt Bay, and AOS 93.
Jody Harmon, RSU 9. There are 10 towns.
Can you list them in reverse alphabetical order?
Dawn Blanchard, Brunswick.
Brian Lucianis, Westbrook School Department.
Emily Kamiga, AOS 93. We'd already said the towns.
Lucy Tabor, Bellevue Unified, Top of Maine.
Mark Bouchard, RSU 39, and we're only 2 towns, Caribou and Stockholm.
Bridget Hopkins, North Haven Community School.
Barb Benjamin to RSU 3, 11 towns. This one leaves us.
Again.
Kathleen Pierce, AOS 98, Buffet, Edgerton, Georgetown, and Southport.
I'm Ashley Hicks, and I'm from Biddeford and Dayton.
I'm Zach Albahari, and I'm from Saco School.
Over in the corner.
I'm
I'm Jeff Yeager from Energy Management Consultants. I'll come see you anywhere you are.
Carla Oliver, Aptifund Paris. Kimberly Oliver, Aptifund Paris.
Hi, I'm Amy Atherton from the Elfer School Department.
Good morning, Sherry Proctor from SAD 61, Bridgeton, Casco, and Naples.
Matthew Robillard, RSU 18, Oakland, China, Belgrade, Rome, and Sydney.
So I'm gonna guess from looking at the crowd, Lucy, you take the travel distance today. That is my guess. How long, Lucy?
Over 5 hours.
Can anyone beat Lucy's 5 hours to get here today?
5.5 if you count the drizzle, the freezing drizzle. It was a fun ride yesterday.
Welcome all. How many folks, if you could stand up just for a second, have been in your position for less than a year? Welcome and thank you. I think a large part of what ASBO is about, at least when I started, for many others, there's very personal connections you make. For me, I will share my personal connection. My personal connection was with Adam. And it was in a barn in Augusta. I think it was called the Elks at the time, which was freezing cold in the middle of February. And Adam said, get involved. So for those of you who are new, I would encourage you, get involved. People are here to help network and support you in your career choice, in what you're doing and what you've chosen to do as a career. So I want to thank you all for coming and also for your support of each other in building what I believe is a very strong and helpful organization to support students in the state of Maine. So thank you for that. I do want to take one solemn note this morning and have a moment of silence. I don't know if you know, but we did lose a member of our community the other night in the shooting. It was a staff member of one of our member districts who passed away. And I do want to take a moment of silence to reflect and acknowledge that. Thank you. I think that's part of the support we provide as well. There's a few folks who are connected to that within our organization who are struggling today. Their families are struggling. And I know people in this room who've gone through similar things. That support is part of who we are too. So for those who know, please reach out and support those folks. We're one group and we need to support each other. So thank you. Today's vendor sponsor is TD Bank. Catherine Heck is the Vice President of Governmental Banking, and she's going to provide some information for us in her vendor spotlight on tips for preventing fraud in school districts. So without further ado, I'll let Catherine come up and connect for her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm very loud. I've never been accused of not being loud. I taught musical theater for 16 years, so if it gets boring, we can do a quick song and dance. So at my local high school, little musical theater. So fun fact about me. Yeah, it's just warming up for a minute. So let me just tell you for a moment, very recently, I've been asked to take over the Maine portfolio for TD Bank and government banking. I joined TD Bank in November of 2024 after a career with the New Hampshire Municipal Association as the state government finance advisor, providing advice, legal advice, and financial advice, education and training, as well as advocacy at the State House to the cities, towns, and schools in New Hampshire. So I work very closely with New Hampshire ASBO, New England GFOA, National GFOA, as well as Maine Municipal Association and other associations. So I was a town treasurer for 17 years and a school board member for 9. Most famously, the Conval School District I served on, where we sued the state. Well, I had to work at the State House, so. That was quite interesting, right, over education funding. So without further ado, I'm just here to talk to you quickly about tips for fraud prevention in school districts, because we know this is a growing problem for everyone, and the fraudsters aren't getting less sophisticated or backing down, they're getting more sophisticated every day. So we know the fraudsters are trying to recruit you if they can't get into your systems, but by the old method. So not only are they washing checks and they're stealing checks out of the mail, but they're trying to bring you in and perpetuate fraud by infiltrating your email with business email compromise, right? They have all the information. You're such a large target because how much sensitive information do you have? You have huge staff, you have school children, you have sensitive personal information for your employees and some of your students, and your names, faces, phone numbers, and everything that you're doing is a public and transparent process, right? So we have our budget process, we are voting on bonds, we are voting on projects, right? New curriculum, huge activities. So we are easy targets for fraudsters. So some of the myths about fraud and cyber attacks, it's never happened here, so we must be protected. It only will happen someplace else is what we hear commonly. The loss is always covered by insurance, which is a big misunderstanding, and I always encourage everyone to check with your risk pool and your insurer to see what your cyber and fraud protection plan looks like. And you have sufficient internal controls or controls in place. What we do know is that about 80% of governments are targeted for fraud, and they're susceptible regardless of size. It's really the information and how the fraudsters can access your information, and they are willing to target anyone. On a weekly basis, as a banker in my new role, I spend at least a day or two a week dealing with a fraud issue or a potential fraud issue. Luckily, customers have things like positive pay in place, ACH block, check block in place, but unfortunately, that's not the case for everyone because it's a service that you opt into, not opt out of. So business email compromise is one of the largest ways that we see, and I always say I've already mailed the money to the Saudi prince for $10 million. I'm waiting for him to marry me, so don't mail him any money because he's all mine. But I'm just kidding, of course that's not happening. And that's the old scam, right? Where they're like, who is falling for this, right? Who is falling for this? But they're getting very sophisticated. They are breaking into email chains. Over a year's time, we have a case like that down from North Carolina where I was consulting for their state legislature last year. They broke into an email chain and looped everybody off an email and contacted directly with the individual in the finance department for over a year to gain trust. Nobody was realizing it. It was very subtle. And the next thing you know, they're changing ACH information and $2.8 million got wired out of the account. And they said, no, this is a trusted vendor. Look. And nobody noticed because they were part of a very large project with engineers, architects, attorneys, and they were on this huge email chain and they broke in. So that is horrifying, right? Outside individuals, right? Check fraud and stolen cards, and then related third parties, meaning our vendors or service providers that are hacked by that, again, another party, and then they have access to your information. So protective actions, like any internal controls, right? We have preventative and detective internal controls. So education, prevention, right? The dual authentication, dual logins, your IT, your security, automation, and of course, something I used to teach a class on 3 times a year was reconciliation. It's one of my favorite things. Reconciliation. That detects fraud so much earlier. If in fact it's happening, and the larger the organization, the more decentralized you are, the harder it is to detect these issues. So of course, your banking partners, whoever they might be, work very, very hard to put things in place that you can opt into, like for check fraud controls, check payee positive pay, right? Getting down to that payee level so they can't wash a check and change the name, check block, ACH fraud controls, ACH block, right? So those are a couple of things, and there's several others, but I won't bore you here today with that, right? And ransomware is something else I wanted to talk about. And while that's not necessarily something that the bank has any control of if you're taken over by ransomware, I spent 2 weeks with a school district that got taken over by ransomware, and they couldn't do anything. We needed to get them check stuff. because they were using blank checks and printing. They had no way to pay anybody. Their systems were completely down, right? They had no way to do any type of business because they had no access to their computer, and ransomware has surpassed $1 billion in the US, right? And then they use extortionate tactics to try to get you to give them money to get your information back. So working to create systems in place in the event of, do you not have access to computers? How would you print checks? How would you get payroll done? On the bank side, your banks can help recreate some direct deposit files. There's a lot we can do. But boy, it was a really stressful time, an awful, awful experience for this school district. It was, I mean, all things stopped. And you are here to educate our children, not to deal with fraudsters. So having kind of a recovery plan and going to CISA.gov, we work closely with CISA, the Secret Service, and other state partners around these kind of attacks because everyone is impacted and it's all hands on deck to make sure that you can continue your continuity of government, get your bills paid, get your people paid, and keep educating the children. So cyber threats, you've all heard of phishing, smishing, vishing, right? Like we just come out with all these new terms every other day, right? Oh, here comes the musical theater. No, just kidding, just kidding. But now we have vishing, where they're using voice calls and voicemails to manipulate victims into divulging information. And if you pick up the phone and say too much on the line, they're recording your voice. And they're able to recreate that with AI now and sound like you. So you can get them to give information. I wish I was kidding. I can't make it up. And we've seen that in the political scene a little bit, right? But now they're using it to defraud us of funds. So you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely so-and-so. I recognize their voice. So just so you know, your bank, regardless of who your banking partner is, your banks are here to protect you. All of us are here to make sure that your funds are secure, safe, accessible, and they're never gonna call and ask you personal information. They're never gonna ask you to keep any type of secret, be dishonest. They're never gonna threaten to cancel your services. Like if you don't do that, that is not how banks operate. They're not gonna ask you to transfer money as any part of an investigation, deposit money into accounts without your knowledge, or request remote access to your computer. I will say it's possible that you could use a service that does require a software upgrade, but that is something that you're going to initiate, you're going to work directly with the bank, and you're going to be a part of. They're not going to call you and say, I need to get into your system today, right? So we have best practices, what some of your do's and don'ts are, right? Using dual controls is a best practice, using a dedicated computer, limiting authorities, right, custom access to different types of users to make sure that no one person can initiate, begin, do the transaction and reconcile that transaction, right, because that protects us that there's 2 eyes that were laid on all of those transactions, which again, 2 eyes is better than 1 because we're all very, very busy. And the fraudsters they're very sophisticated today. Changing passwords, using firewalls, securing your check stock and your stamp. You cannot control that things are being stolen out of the US Postal Service. In fact, in December, they came out and told us, there was an announcement, don't mail checks anymore. They're being stolen. 30% are being stolen by our own employees. I didn't even know what to say when I read that. I wasn't even sure. I'm like, I just paid you for a stamp. So, but people want to do business still with paper, so it's complicated. And ACH, of course, has its own vulnerabilities. So we talked about some of those protections that you can put in place with positive pay and ACH debt blocks and ACH filters and putting limits on that and reviewing that insurance company, right? So we don't want to use hyperlinks. We don't want to click on links we're not aware of. You're better off calling your bank directly if you think that something's suspicious, even if it's a perfectly legitimate email, because the bank is happy to qualify that, yes, we did send you that email, and yes, it's safe to click on the link, right? And I won't get into sharing passwords and IDs because I'm sure you already know all that, right? But checking, confirming, and coaching is our best defense against some of these cyber attacks, right? So I put, you'll get a copy of this, I understand. I put kind of the word went out of my mouth because we use it all the time in education. I was on a school board, never mind, can't think of the word right now, but a layered structure for defense, right? And how we want to look at layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3. If the dark green is something the bank can help you with, the yellow is a process for the customer or a tactic that the customer, you yourselves can use. And the dark green is, and the light green rather, is a dual control and a partnership approach that we can all take together to protect your accounts. At the end of the presentation, I have put together some resources for Maine specifically around cybersecurity, some fraud control information from, banks associations, CISA, the National Council on Sharing Information, and the National Institute on Standards and Technology. So, some outside information if you wanted to review it. And behind me, I have some surveys at my table that are really just for you to take home, take away, and kind of do a fraud preparedness, cyber preparedness survey for yourself to see kind of where you shake out and get you thinking a little bit about this. So I won't take any more of your time. I really appreciate being here. I look forward to being a partner with MaineASBO. It's a fantastic organization, the education and the training, and most of all, I appreciate what you all do every day for our students. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Catherine's going to be here, so if you have questions or specific questions, feel free, and certainly go and see her during the break, which will be shortly, as well as at lunchtime. I also want a couple of other things. I want to thank Train as well as our HR for having vendor tables here today and being collaborative vendor sponsors. Please see them, support them. And they're here to share information, just like Catherine said, and to help educate us. There are other vendors here today as well that are vendor sponsors of our organization. They come to every meeting. Have those conversations with them. They are important resources and they are an important part of our organization. Joanne could not be here today. Joanne is still recovering from surgery. For those of you who were here in February, Joanne had surgery over the winter and is still recovering. If you do not know, Joanne gave her resignation notice at the end of June. We have posted and are looking for a new part-time executive director. It's an integral part of what we do. I think our organization has made great strides in the past 4 or 5 years of what we're doing and what our mission is and what we're trying to accomplish. I think our greatest success for the replacement of Joanne in that position is going to come from our organization and people we know. We have it posted everywhere. We will continue to post it. It is posted as a position that's open until the board fills it and a suitable candidate is found. So I would encourage folks that if you know folks who are really passionate about what we do and feel that it would fit this role, please refer them to any board member and email us or email Joanne. Joanne is still a very integral part of what we're doing and moving forward in the transition to a new executive director. Any questions on that and that role? Because that is a critical part of what the board's going to be doing in the next several months. If you feel there's things, and you hear me say this at every meeting, it's your organization. It's not mine, it's not board members individually. If there's things that you want to see next year or from that position, let us know. We want to support the organization and you any way we can in moving forward. And hopefully you found over the past 2 years that Joanne's been here that we've done that and that we continue to do that in a meaningful and purposeful way. So please let us know. The board will be having its annual retreat at the end of June. Please communicate with us or through Joanne topics that you feel the board should be discussing in its planning for next year. So we really focus on a July to June year. That's our focus, that's how we're planning, that's how our goal setting is, and we're really looking for input as to what would you like to see us do in the next year? What would you like the organization to accomplish in the next year? Some of the goals that we have on the table are certainly related, and you're going to hear it in committee reports, whether it's legislative or PD. But let us know. Because without you letting us know, we don't have input. And we're gonna do the best we can, but we really need to hear from you what you wanna see and what you wanna get accomplished. Any questions on any of that? This is the last meeting of this school year. We will be meeting over the summer as well as a board. Just want to let you know that there isn't any more that we're doing as a collaborative group after this meeting for this school year. Getting into the business part of the meeting, is there a motion to approve the minutes from February 28th? Thank you, Lucy.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jen. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries, Dawn. Next is to approve the treasurer's report. Is there a motion? Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. I'm confused because you're both at the same time. I'll let Dawn make up her mind. Any discussion on the treasurer's report? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? I will talk for just a second. Part of the focus that the board's been discussing so that you're informed and we're completely transparent with you is how is the sustainability of the position for the executive director and what does that look like? Currently, it's one position, part-time, about 20 hours a week or so. We're consulting with Joanne on how that has worked in the past, just shy of 2 years. What are the pros? What are the cons? I know one of hers is there's a lot of administrative work that she's doing as an executive director. The board is really considering that, looking at that and listening to that and saying, okay, how do we best fit this position? It's new to us, right? It's only been 2 years. How do we best fit that in when there's administrative responsibilities and then we're also asking for very specific goals from that position to carry the organization forward. We will continue to keep you informed. We have done the best we can with dues, but to continue this position at some point, we are going to continue to look at dues. We set dues early so that folks could put it in the budget. When I'm talking about a year from now, is really talking about what growth have we experienced, how is it going fiscally, and what do we need to do to be sustainable in that position. I say that because it may be implicit, but maybe not. And I want to be very clear that we're not operating with a fund balance that can carry us for 3 or 4 years. We're going from year to year, which I think is good from a member standpoint. We're not sitting on tons of money with your dues. But in the same vein, I want to be very clear that if this is an important position for us to continue the growth of what we're doing, and it's passionate about us as an organization, you've heard me stand up here for the past 2 years talking about increasing membership dues. Go from a single membership to a district membership if you're a larger district. All of those things. We're looking at all of that. So I want you to know that as a board, we are looking at that. And we're trying to do our best to balance all of that. Again, your input's going to be important in that. Any questions before I kind of close out of the financial side? I'll say one more thing on dues. I'm not done, I guess. We're also having a discussion about smaller versus medium-sized versus larger districts, because we have heard from some smaller districts, well, I can't afford all of that. And we hear that. We're trying to figure out what is the best mix of that. We aren't changing it for next year. We've already promised what we're going to promise for next year. But we do and are going to look over the summer as to what structure of dues and what new structure might we review or look at that might be more suitable for the membership as a whole. I didn't want to let go of that. So. Next, we're going to have committee reports. I'm sure Zach wants to talk about legislative. You want to talk about legislative?
Sherry and I will have some
Go for it.
words of wisdom, I guess.
You go first.
No, you. You did more work than I did. She's been working hard.
Yeah, the legislative committee. There has been a lot going on at the legislature, but I can honestly say that I haven't seen them pass anything yet. So I'm just gonna update you a little bit. We talked about the minimum teacher salaries last time, which would move teachers minimum to $45,000 in FY '27, all the way up to $52,500 in FY '30. Right now, that's tabled. I think there's a lot of support for it, but the reason it's tabled is the state doesn't have any money to foot the bill, which is good at the moment. Late start for high schools, moving statewide to 8:30. That was voted ought to pass on March 5th. I have not seen it go to the full legislature yet, so we'll see what happens with that. Repealing the PFML, I have actually not seen any action on that bill. I mean, nothing, no anything. But there is a bill, LD 1400. Was you going to talk about that? 1400, another PFML bill for schools only. That would repeal it for schools if the school can give proof that they have commensurate leave of 12 weeks as per their collective bargaining agreement. It's quite a long bill, but the long and short of it is I haven't seen anything on moving out of committee at this point. They are having, I believe, a public hearing on LD 1400. You can still submit comments on the bill, which is, I would absolutely encourage that, because there's still time on that bill. Coming up, I think on Monday the 9th, there's going to be a huge public hearing on repealing certain immunization requirements, and then there's a second bill to restore religious exemptions for immunization requirements. The public hearing is on April 7th. So this, as far as, it's my understanding that the legislature is expecting a huge crowd for that one. Here's a new one that we haven't talked about, LD 11, an act requiring temperature standards in school buildings. It requires a school board to adopt a policy on minimum and maximum temperatures in schools. I'm like, okay. I don't know. Some of these bills, I'm listening to them going, So one of the bills that I had mentioned last time, an act to provide educational opportunities for students in smaller schools, 200 or fewer students, that was voted ought not to pass. An act to allow the spouse of a school board member to serve as a stipend employee within the district was tabled. There was another act to codify federal salary thresholds. That was ought to pass as amended, and that basically lines up the state with the federal standards on minimum salary for overtime. Okay, let's see. The last one I want to mention that is new that I haven't seen was an act to maximize federal funding and protect Maine's universal school meals program. This legislation is really interesting because the way I'm reading it, and this is just me reading it, is that we have to comply with recommendations from the DOE on school lunch programs. We have to maximize or go along with what they recommend for our particular school, be it the community eligibility provision or something different. If we don't comply with the department's recommendations, it reads to say that we could suffer from because of that. I'm going to ask Joanne to update MaineASBO on that as it moves along, because it does look like it has implications for all of us if we are participating in the hot lunch program. Okay, And, oh, finally, I'm gonna just, an act to replace minimum hourly wage with a regionally based living wage. That's another interesting one because it regionalizes minimum wage in the state. And it was actually voted ought to pass in committee. So that's another one that could be interesting. Your turn.
All right. So mine is legislative, but in a strange and weird kind of way. Anybody watch the news? So the budget passed, so we have to have a balanced budget, biennial budget. So for 26, 27, the budget passed on a party line vote. So a group of current and former legislators got together and filed for a citizen petition, which means that they get 68,000 signers by the middle of June, then the budget for the state will not go into effect on July 1st. So that could impact how they fund schools and everything else because they will not have a budget. It can be overridden by a 2/3 majority vote of the legislature to pass a budget. So just so you know, it's out there. Hopefully they'll work together and come up with something. Otherwise, there will be a vote in November for the whole state to vote on whether the state's budget should go forward. And then I guess if it fails, they go back to the drawing board and do their thing. So that could be pretty impactful for our state aid and other things, like it could freeze it, I'm not sure. But they would not have a legally passed budget on July 1st if enough signatures are gathered by the middle of June. And on that note.
On that note, they give it back to me. Couple of things. As you probably know, there are a ton of LDs right now on the floor and on the table in committee. Few notes. Best thing that you can do is to be kept abreast of what's going on and to provide testimony. And even if it's in writing, provide input. You've heard from legislators that we've brought to ASBO meetings that they are impacted by telephone calls and by your written comment on various bills. What we're trying to do at ASBO, which is really hard, and I'm going to be honest about it, is to keep up to date with it all. Zach and Sherry have done a great job. Joanne has done a tremendous job. But it's almost like a full-time job just to keep up with what's happening in the legislature. They certainly could use more help. If you have interest in this, if you have interest in what's being proposed to the legislature in LDs and following it through committees, they could certainly use the help in breaking out more of that information to folks. So there's a lot going on. The other part I want to mention is that MEPRI did do their work. There was work the legislature performed in order to look at the subsidy formula. That report came out. I'm not sure where it stands right now, but we'll keep you up to date on that as that progresses. The hard part about the subsidy formula is it's just ingrained in the DOE as well as in the state legislature. And it is very much it's a legal legislative issue. And it's going to take a lot of work. This is just me personally, I don't see that there's going to be dramatic change in the next year or so on that. But that doesn't mean that it's not important that go through various reviews in order to support how we all receive money from the state. Bless you. If you're interested in that as well as other legislative items, let us know. Anything on legislative that people want to comment or questions? PD, is there anyone on PD committee here? Jen? Mark? You guys want, come on up.
But we have approved a couple of different business managers to move forward in the certification process that the board approved at last year's review. Other than that,
Keep your eyes open for a lunch and learn program.
yeah.
So PD, our commitment this year was we would continue with 4 in-person meetings and we would do lunch and learns in between. The feedback we've received to date is that that's an enjoyable format. It provides some in-person meetings, but also helps with providing something that's remote, accessible, and shorter for people to get some professional development. Again, provide input to us. No, I hate it. Tell us. No, we like it. We'd like more of it. Let us know. There's topics that you didn't cover this year that we really would have liked to have seen. Let us know. That's how we are going to help develop over the summer and into the fall our programming for next year. Tri-State, I'll talk about Tri-State is May 21st to 23rd in Whitefield, New Hampshire. If you have not registered and got a hotel room, do so immediately. If you have problems with the hotel room, let Kelly or myself know. We've had some problems with the hotel with that committee, but I think they've worked out most of that. If you haven't, you got to register right away because that is filled up. It is a great agenda, and I think it's going really well. I think Joanne sent something out. I think it closed on Friday, if I'm not mistaken, on first-time attendees for the scholarship. And we'll be communicating those scholarship recipients here pretty soon. Any questions on Tri-State? Next is annual board election. This is within our bylaws, so this part of the meeting is very specific. In order to vote for those who are on the slate for a 3-year term, that is Zach Harding from Yarmouth, Sherry Moody from Mid-Coast School of Technology, and myself from RSU 57. There is, according to the bylaws, there's only one vote per school district. So if you have staff members here, like SAD 6 or Lewiston, you get one vote. You guys got to figure out whether you're voting for or against and have one person vote. Dawn and her team are going to count hands to make sure that we're satisfying the bylaws. But I would entertain a motion to approve all 3 of those candidates for a 3-year term on ASBO board.
So
Okay, who was first? Sorry.
I don't know.
Sherry Proctor.
Second.
Mark Bouchard was second. So there's a motion and a second. Is there discussion?
How about thank you?
You're welcome. Any discussion or questions? Those in favor, and please keep your hand up because Dawn and her team have to count to make sure we have the required number of votes. Now shake it all around. Move it side to side. Move it up and down. Are you guys set?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Opposed? And keep your hand up if you're opposed. Can I have one? Any abstaining? Thank you and sorry for that formality, but we're required to record it that way. There were 0 against and 0 abstentions. Annual meeting, this is the formal part of the meeting. Are there any other items to be brought before this board or this organization that a member wants to bring forward? This is your time. Hearing none, I'm going to close the meeting. Do I have a motion to close the annual meeting and the voting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? And I don't need a count. Thank you. So that part of the meeting is required in our bylaws. It's required that there be a vote for board members and that any other business to come before the board of the organization annually is brought at that meeting. Don will note that, and that will be part of the minutes as well. Before I get into the last agenda item, I just want to personally thank, first and foremost, the board. For those of you who don't know who the board is, Sherry Proctor, just stand up. Sherry Moody, Cheryl Fournier, Zach Harding, Don Pooler. Kelly is not here today, and Sybil Brewer is not here. Kelly Wentworth and Sybil Brewer, and myself. And Mark, sorry. I went in reverse order. Stand up, Mark. They do a lot of work, and they do a lot of work behind the scenes for this organization. So I want to thank them. I'm going to personally miss Joanne. Joanne and I talk, it seems like every day or every other day. She has been great to work with. She's been great for the organization, and I really want to thank her. It is going to be somewhat emotional for me because we have developed a close relationship previously and now in this role. But she has a well-deserved retirement ahead of her, and I just want to personally and publicly thank her because she has started our organization in a direction that really is from the ground up to move us forward. So I want to thank her. I want to thank our membership. You have been very supportive and really behind allowing us to make some changes that I know aren't always easy. And they're not easy decisions. And I just want to thank you for that. Because, and I'll say it again, it's your organization. It is not mine, it is not the board's, it's yours. We're just privileged to be able to help organize and lead it in whatever direction you tell us you want it to go. So I want to thank you for that. The last item for today is an annual award. Dave Holden Award is given out to an outstanding business official in the state of Maine. Mine hangs on my office wall in a direction where I see it from my desk every day. It's meaningful, it's purposeful, and it means that people who are my colleagues really supported the work I did in that particular year to lead ASBO in a positive direction. This year's recipient, through the nomination process, I'm going to read just a few comments that were provided, and there were several people nominated, and it was exciting to really read and see all of the support for individuals who were nominated. This individual excelled in their various roles as a business office manager, grant manager, and senior accountant. They're incredibly efficient, organized, and accurate in their work. The common theme was they're always the first to help, whether it's within the organization or outside of the organization. And they have been a constant support to MaineASBO for years. The other comments are believe in the power of a professional network and contribute to ASBO as a constant and informed member. Spent numerous hours helping to navigate new tasks and endeavors for a new business manager, and made themselves available and always paid it forward. And this individual says, I hope that I'm as fortunate to be able to pay it forward as this person has to me. We unfortunately don't have the award. Joanne's getting it, but this year's Dave Holden Award winner is from Lewiston, is Jackie Smith.
Oh my gosh. I'm speechless. I really did not expect this at all. I'm so grateful for the experiences that I've had working here in Maine for the last 15 years. To my mentor, Adam. He's an awesome person and the best boss anybody could ask for. ASBO has been a valuable resource for me. I would recommend that everybody stay connected and volunteer if you can. You can learn so much from just coming. I'm so nervous, I don't even know what I'm saying. But thank you all very much, and I have 87 more days, so coming down. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Congratulations, Jackie. As Jackie alluded, Jackie is retiring this year. Just personally for me, Jackie's been great. Jackie's been really supportive of the organization. We've had fun at a couple of tri-state events out of state. We won't get into those fun nights, but she's just been a great person, a great support for ASBO, and what has been said in these reflections from the people who nominated her couldn't be more accurate. So congratulations and happy retirement. Is there any other business to come before the meeting before we take a break and then get into presentations? This is your chance. Can be positive, can be negative, can be supportive, can be nothing. Mark.
Just wanted to share a quick story with you, as this is my last in-person meeting as well. I'm going to be retiring at the end of September. And going into my 12th year, there was an ad in the local newspaper, the Aroostook Republican, that said that there was a business manager's job opening in Caribou. And at the time, I worked for the Department of Veterans and Emergency Management for the state of Maine. The Humvee place, if any of you lived along I-95, you saw all those military vehicles going up and down the road. I was their director of quality, which was a very demanding job. I was also the Army's liaison. So I got to enjoy getting yelled at by colonels about every other day about where's my Humvees. But when I saw the ad, I thought, well, really, this is a good way to kind of just coast into retirement, right? It's a school department. How hard can it be, right? Well, I got to tell you, this was the toughest job, but actually also the most rewarding job that I've ever had. And it's primarily because of this organization. And as we mentioned earlier, I traveled from Caribou, and I've only missed one in-person meeting other than the COVID years, because I'm that I love this group so much, and I've learned so much from this group. So keep helping each other. Of all groups that I'm going to miss, this is going to be the most. So, thank you, and thank you for putting up with all my phone calls. I used to call many of you for help, and every once in a while, if there was a question I thought was too dumb or too embarrassed to ask anyone else, I'd call Adam. Thank you.
That's like your fourth mention this morning, Adam. You're turning red now. Mark, happy retirement. I know you've got till September. I hope you enjoy and get some quality time with your family. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to close the business meeting. We'll take a break, and then, what time is it right now? I don't have a clock. What time is it?
9:25.
Perfect. We'll start around 10:40, 10:45 with our HR Smith and Tyler doing an update on uniform grant guidance. So take a break, use the restrooms, and there's food in the back. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so as Colin said, I'm with our HR Smith and Company, and we audit, I think I have it on this next slide, so just kind of for information. So we are up to about 75 employees. When I started, I think we were at 25. So we've added quite a bit of capacity. We do audit about 600 clients now, but that's between Maine and Vermont. We do a bunch of towns as well, and we do, I think, 2/3 of the counties in the state. So we audit a bunch of different, some nonprofits, a lot of housing authorities. So. And that's just who I am. So one thing I'm going to preface this with in general anyways is, so this is based on, a lot of my information is coming through training that I also, between reading the changes, but also going through a couple of AICPA trainings on the topic. And I will warn you, there are some differences in interpretation of those changes from what, as a CPA or AICPA sees, from what you may have heard from, say, Drummond Woodsum, or not from Drummond Woodsum, from Brewman. And I don't know how many of you went to the Brewman training in Brewer, but I had an employee up there, and so, because he's fairly new. And so I just kind of want to warn you, there will be a little bit of interpretation differences, so. There are a number, I mean, so these are kind of more generic changes, and so I just kind of wanted to throw them in there. Some of them may or may not directly pertain to the school district. Now I'm actually going to turn this a little bit, because I like to read that more. So they did produce, essentially as part of the process, they create what's called a red line document, and it goes through and actually shows all the changes that are going to be made and being proposed, and then people will go through and make comments and stuff about that. There are also crosswalks and different, so different documents you can kind of look at to kind of see what's being changed. So the other piece about the update, so quite like when they change from, when they combine, like say like A133 and A87 and A21, and we went to the uniform grant guidance, different departments within the federal government adopted those changes in different timelines. So I don't know, and so I do follow like what Brewman is posting through like LinkedIn and stuff, and so one of the things I've noticed that they've even posted and are talking about and may have come through like the state is the Department of Education had actually adopted some changes, I think in January, and then when the new administration came in, they actually reverted back some of those changes, and they'll just take place at the start of essentially when your next grant comes out. But, so some other agencies like Department of Agriculture adopted all those changes as soon as they could. So you can kind of see down here they've already adopted the 2024 revisions, Department of Agriculture, and probably a lot of agencies that you will never interact with, but just kind of a full list of different agencies on how they're adopting those changes. So for Department of Education, and so I just kind of kept with the generic, what was initially posted before they had made the change in January and reverted back. So essentially, and actually, wow, I put the wrong date. So your state administered grant, any grant that for the state of Maine, it's going to be July 1, 2025. So I'll send an update because I know this was already, I sent this to Joanne already. And so your state administered grant, so that's kind of like, we're talking IDA, Title I. I believe that will also include child nutrition, except for child nutrition is Department of Agriculture, so theirs will have already adopted. So if you do apply for any direct awards that are either done discretionary, that's typically the most common for school districts if you're applying directly. So those are the awards where they put out kind of an RFP at the federal level and just kind of say, hey, apply for this. So the direct formula grant sometimes may not, it doesn't generally apply to a lot of school districts, but direct formula grants is quite like the IDA, except for it's coming directly from the feds. So most of what you're going to see anyways is going to be those state administered. That's your biggest pot of money. And again, that date is 1 year too soon. The application will actually be July 1, 2025. The way I kind of organize this is actually quite like how AICPA organized their presentation. So essentially what we'll kind of do is go through each of the subparts. I broke out some information a little differently in different parts just to kind of show you what it looked like and some different things to talk about. And I'll bring up a couple of things as I was reading through comments and responses from OMB to some of the comments that I thought were kind of interesting and indicative of why they were making the changes. So in subpart A, the biggest thing with subpart A is they tried to remove a lot of definitions that they didn't feel as though were really needed, and they did change some different definitions. So this, I'll point out, this is one of those areas where I know what was said at Brewer, but I'll also tell you what during our training, what was said. So like if you look at like the supply threshold moving from 5,000 to 10,000, so they very specifically talked about the fact that I know one of the things that was talked about in Brewer was that for the state of Maine, that's going to stay at $5,000 because that's what the state has. But what AICPA pointed out is anything that's not in your grant award agreement just goes by 2 CFR Part 200. So if they would have, so what they were trying to notify was, or make a point of, was if a state or a pass-through agency wants to have anything different than what's in 2 CFR Part 200, it needs to be part of the grant agreement. So what they would say is, you go by your grant agreement. And so if they want to make a change, then they should put it as part of your, any modifications from 2 CFR Part 200 would need to be in that grant agreement. So again, that's, two of those are kind of tied together. The modified total direct cost for your indirect cost rates, and I know nobody, I don't believe anybody has an indirect cost rate at this point. So the modified total direct cost sub-award threshold is moving from 25 to 50,000. And then they change a couple, again, some other definitions. So like nonprofit organization, removing corporation, trust, association. So again, just some wording changes. For school districts, it doesn't have a huge impact, but just to kind of, in case you run into it, throwing in some extra information. Again, just some wording differences. A lot of this was really trying to make things a little bit more clear in 2 CFR Part 200. I don't know if anybody has read all of 2 CFR Part 200, but some of it can get pretty dry, and some of it is a little bit confusing at times. So trying to make it a little bit more clear. And then, so one of those things is including known and likely question cost definition. So they're updating some stuff with that. And they actually provide some examples of what a question cost is or is not. Because, so even identifying what a question cost is as an auditor, when you count it as a question cost, especially when you don't necessarily, you can't quantify the total amount of question cost. So because we're pulling a sample and we might see something that was charged to the grant that maybe shouldn't have been, and so it's easy to identify your known question cost, but when you're talking about, what's the total population question cost, that can be a little bit more difficult to kind of quantify. And so just provide some examples, I suppose mostly for our benefit to know how to calculate that. Again, so I'm not going to read through all of these, but so I wanted to include them, and then you can go through the slides and kind of read through all of these definition change, just general provisions. I'm going to spend more time kind of on the other parts. I will note, and I'm not sure if this is where it's talking about it, but they did, they made a point to kind of talk about, I think it said at one point in time, non-federal entity, and so they didn't feel as though that was particularly clear. And especially from the federal perspective, what they're concerned about is their direct recipients and the sub-recipients of the direct sub-recipients. And I know not many times, at least again for school districts, is it important, but when you get to like that second tier of sub-recipients, they actually don't, I won't say they don't care, but they're less concerned about that level of sub-recipient. It's not, again, it's not as prevalent in the school districts, but we do see like with, I'll use CDBG funds, which go through Department of Economic Community Development. Those funds will sometimes have 5 or 6 layers of sub-recipients. And so from the federal perspective, they're concerned about the state level as the recipient, and then whoever that initially goes to for funds as a sub-recipient. And the layers underneath that, they're less concerned about those layers. Again, some more some changes. And then actually, so I will kind of, so when we're talking about notice of funding opportunities, maybe not, as you look at grants, if you ever take a look at grants.gov to see some direct grants that you could apply for, they really wanted agencies to use plain language and not necessarily, so to make it a little bit easier for organizations to even understand what the grant is trying to get at, and which will allow you to apply for that grant easier and know which ones are actually would be good for you to apply to. And then, so lastly, they did add a section to provide protection for whistleblowers. So internal controls, so this is, I don't know, this is probably 90% of what we test is controls. And then of course we do test obviously, and especially for federal grants, we're testing for allowability, but really you're testing to ensure that somebody has internal controls properly set up, and that they actually will work for whatever particular program you're running. And so here's a big area where, so I underline this word document. And so this is one of those areas where, so they added this word around documenting your internal controls. And so commenters made a big deal of this, of do we really have to have written procedures on our internal controls? And OMB came back with, you are always supposed to have written procedures. We're just emphasizing that point now within 2 CFR Part 200. So they made a very big point of, you are always supposed to have written procedures. We're just now actually putting that word into CFR Part 200. So they do speak to following the standards for internal controls in the federal government or COSO framework. So when we talk about standards for internal controls in the federal government, that's referring to the Green Book. You can download that for free and actually look through it. I will tell you, it is not written in plain language. So if you ever want to get really confused on, or people, an agency putting together a lot of words that may take a graduate level education in finance or in accounting to understand it, that is a great book to read. And I don't believe the COSO, it's based off in the COSO framework, so I'm sure it's not a whole lot, that's not a whole lot better, but COSO is referring to industry. So those are industry standards. And so, but they wrote such a good framework that Office of Management Budget said, well, we're just going to base our internal controls off from that because those were some really good standards. They are really great standards. I'm just, the Green Book is a little bit, it's quite the book, it's quite the document to read. So they also did add something around recipients and subrecipients take reasonable cybersecurity and other measures to safeguard information. So I thought this would be particularly relevant in the fact, and I can't remember, is it one of the two student databases recently got breached and a lot of information has been getting out there. So, and I can tell you whether I agree with the applicability to our system or not. When I was at the state, we actually had a finding for a number of years talking about doing SOC reporting. And so when we're talking about information security, that's generally how auditors would test whether you have the proper controls set up. And a lot of this just kind of comes down to, do you even have a mechanism for when somebody leaves your agency that they no longer have access to the system? So that's part of it, but there are other pieces of it as far as, like technology security. And so as you're kind of writing contracts with vendors, making sure that they have the proper safeguard set up on their system and that they're getting that SOC reporting done. So so this is kind of the graphics around the COSO framework, and these actually come out of the Green Book. But again, just talking about what's your control environment, have you done a risk assessment for your organization, what are your control activities to ensure everything is safe, and then how are you providing information and communicating with whether that's your staff or the community. So it's essentially, how are you talking about all of your controls and what's going on within your organization? And then what are your monitoring activities internally to ensure that everything is being done correctly and that you've set up internal control activities, and how do you ensure that those control activities are actually occurring? And then so you have the different levels for that, and then I forget what the other piece, the operation, but I think this front piece is really kind of important, and just kind of, like, how do you even, have you documented these items, and then how are you maintaining that, essentially. I don't believe many of your grants, if I remember correctly, have a cost sharing, but they did update the language that clarified matching is a type of cost sharing. And so I say that, and then we can talk about IDA and Title I both have some sort of matching requirement. And so the feds would actually consider that a type of cost sharing. And then AICPA noted that this may change how OMB refers to related compliance requirement around cost sharing. So I just it wasn't anything that was even clear to them. So just keep that in mind that, as things kind of move forward and this gets implemented, they could change how they look at it. So, again, so when we're looking at budget and program plans, they modified the language that combines requirements for both construction and non-construction awards. They changed the language for when a federal agency may not allow a transfer of funds. Again, doesn't really necessarily apply to you, but just because that's at the federal level, but it could affect the type of funds that are even available. And then they also changed language that a federal agency or pass-through agency should not require approval of a change of subrecipient unless it was determining factor in the approval process. So, so this really kind of gets down to, as you're applying for funds, even at the state, as a subrecipient of the state, unless it was contingent on the approval of whatever your plan was, you shouldn't necessarily have to apply for a change in how you're spending funds unless it's going, again, it's gonna change. It was kind of, that was the reason why you got that funding. That could become a little bit wonky, I know, with like the reimbursement system, and so you may have to at least put in budgetary changes, but it's just something to kind of keep in mind. And then updated language to distinguish between a no-cost extension and a one-time extension. Again, that's just kind of a definition change. A lot of what OMB changed, again, was definitions. They changed wording. Oh, okay, it did move. I didn't see it move. All right, so for equipment, they added guidance on what conditional title means. I've never run into a conditional title, so I'm not, but again, some of this information I'm just adding. And then they did revise the guidance to allow Indian tribes to dispose of equipment in accordance with tribal law versus, so there may be differences at times, and I don't know if Maine Indian Ed is here. I didn't look for her, but there could be instances where their local tribal law differs from what the Uniform Grant Guidance says, and so they're now allowed to follow their tribal law even if it doesn't conform with the Uniform Grant Guidance. And again, put it in here, increase the equipment threshold from 5 to 10,000. And just for reference, they made some tweaks to what equipment means. And then I just kind of highlighted, the lesser of the capitalization threshold by the recipient or subrecipient for financial state purposes or $10,000. Again, so you could hold a lower threshold than that $10,000, and if you do, then you need to go by that level. So, and especially, like right now, if you specify an amount within your internal controls of what equipment is, and that threshold specifically says 5,000, you do need to continue following your 5,000 that you have locally for your, whether it's for federal or financial statement purposes. But if you don't specify that amount and you just reference Uniform Grant Guidance, then you may be able to go up to the 10,000, because that's, or at least once it fully goes into effect in July. So. Supplies, just clarifies the requirement for unused supplies. Applies to the aggregate value of all supply types and not just like item supplies. So again, if you're buying a bunch of supplies with your grant funding, even if they're dissimilar types of supplies, when you buy those supplies with your grant funding, you need to they're all part of the same supply, and so you need to aggregate that amount, and then which will help you kind of distinguish how you're tracking it. And then they again included a definition for unused supplies. Up there, try not to read everything right from the slides, but some more stuff that's going to apply just to the Indian tribes, and again talking about they have a little bit more flexibility in following their own procedures, even if they might differ some from the Uniform Grant Guidance, and if they do, they can follow their own, but they do still have to follow certain sections of 2 CFR Part 200. They did remove the prohibition of using geographic preference requirements. So that may be of interest to some of, because under the original version of 2 CFR Part 200, it specifically prohibited geographic preference, so you couldn't say that we're gonna provide preference to local vendors. So that was strictly prohibited. That prohibition is now gone, and so if you did want to have some sort of, if you're doing some sort of RFP, you can actually now include or you will be able to include soon, a clause in there to give preference to local vendors. And then it just clarified that does not prohibit recipients and subrecipients from incorporating a scoring mechanism that rewards bidders committing to specific numbers and types of U.S. jobs, as well as certain competition and benefits. So again, it's just talking about how, if you're doing an RFP and how are you scoring that RFP. You should have something, if you're gonna do an RFP, having something specific in how you actually do that scoring. Having been on a couple of RFPs at the state, they have very specific guidelines on how many points are awarded to different, whether, like the technical versus the price. So they have very specific ways in how they score. And then they do like consensus scoring. So it's good to have that all kind of written out, and then, and then you can think about this when you do that. It doesn't really change a lot, or it doesn't really, it's more, again, more wording changes, but so when we're talking about procurement method, we don't talk about small, or 2 CFR Part 200 doesn't talk about small purchases. We're now talking about simplified acquisitions. And so it's just referring to the fact that when you're under that simplified acquisition threshold, which I believe is 250,000, but I know it gets adjusted by inflation, so which is why I say 250,000. You're allowed to use, you can call up and reference, call up local vendors and ask them for a quote and make sure you're documenting that quote, but you can call up and ask for a quote versus having to do some sort of formal RFP or do, opening bids at a public meeting. So again, it's just kind of a word change. And then they did clarify that micro purchases and simplified acquisition are types of informal procurement methods for small purchases, which is also interesting because they changed small purchases to simplified acquisition. I didn't notice that before, but so also keep in mind your micro purchase threshold and your small purchase threshold that are all, you can look those up in 2 CFR Part 200. There are actually some ways, because I believe the threshold that's listed in 2 CFR Part 200 is 10,000, if I remember correctly. But there are ways to actually increase it beyond that. But you do have to, one thing that you do have to be is considered low risk. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then, so there's a couple other things. So they removed the requirement that local and tribal governments must open sealed bids in public. So if you're doing the sealed bids, which I just talked about, previously you had to do that during a public meeting. And basically what they're saying is you no longer have to do that in a public meeting. You can be a little bit less transparent about the bids. But I would suspect I would think you would have to at least have some way of recording which bids came in. And so you would want to think about within your control structure, how are you going to account for which bids came in and then opening them and recording whatever, so normally for sealed bids, you're gonna have some standard thing that's going on. And so there may not be other factors that you're thinking about. And you're only concerned with price. So But you would want to have some way to document, again, a control to be able to document which bids came in and then opening them up. This is always fun, is the subrecipient versus a contractor determination. The pass-through entity is responsible for determining if an entity receiving federal funds is a subrecipient or a contractor. So when we look at pass-through entity, you would be thinking the state, but also think that when you get those funds from the state and you're hiring somebody, you also do need to think about, is who you hiring, are they actually a contractor, or are they really performing a subrecipient role? And a lot of that comes down to like what is that relationship? So, and when I say that, it's easier, kind of almost easier to explain the contractor, because the contractor is performing a specific task. So thinking of like IDA funds, because I used to manage those funds. A lot of times IDA may not have enough PT or OT staff or psychological or speech therapy, and so they're hiring a contractor to provide speech therapy services. That speech pathologist doesn't have the latitude to determine which services are being provided to the students. They're being told which services to provide to which students, because that's, so that's contractual, and those services were determined by the IEP team. Versus if we were talking like an additional subrecipient level, you're giving them some control over how to perform that programming for the students. So if they have some sort of control over how the education resources are being provided, then that might become a subrecipient relationship. And so you just need to think about those. Again, a lot of your IDA ones, those are easy. Where I could see more difficulty is depending on the type of contract you're hiring and how much latitude you're providing them for like Title I. I could see there could be, depending on what you're hiring them to do. So just think about that. The other one that, and I don't see it in Maine, but we see it in Vermont more often, is a lot of school districts in Vermont actually contract out their food service. But most of those are pretty straightforward as how that's being done. But again, just think about, especially maybe with other grants, on how much latitude you're providing the other person to provide services. And then clarify that the sample of characteristics provided is in determining if an entity is a subrecipient or contractor, and are not the only that should be used. Okay, so again, so that's a lot of what I was just talking about, is just the fact that there's no single factor that's going to actually tell you whether it's the culmination of factors of what's going on. Again, just some minor changes for the requirements for pass-through entities. They added a requirement that the pass-through entity must confirm potential subrecipients are not suspended, debarred, or otherwise excluded from receiving federal funds. So again, and I think the state on the Department of Education, on especially the ones that are running through the grant management system, are very good about doing this check. There's some type of certification that I believe your superintendent is signing off that they're not debarred from receiving federal funds. I'm not as certain on, especially as we had all those ESSER funds and the state provided SLF or F funds for different purposes. If they were as good about doing that check, but they can probably also use the fact that we've already checked it for IDA, we checked it for ESSA. So do we really need to check 5 times? We've already checked 2 or 3 times, because if they're a Perkins recipient, then there's probably something in there about that as well. and then added language that the pass-through entity must provide information when available if it is not available when the funds are awarded. So if there is information that needs to be passed on to the subrecipients, and maybe it wasn't provided, in the original award notice or the funding opportunity award notice, that when they do have that information, that they do need to turn around and provide that to all the subrecipients. And I do think the department is very good about providing any follow-up information around grant awards. But it is a requirement, it's specifically noted in there now. If there are any fixed amount subawards, increase the threshold for fixed amount subawards from $250,000 to $500,000 and clarified that written prior approval is needed prior to awarding. And again, this probably won't pertain to you, but it could pertain to you as a recipient, but probably not so much as if you're passing through money. For the application, they clarify the cost principles in subpart E do not apply to the grant and cooperative agreements for food commodities. I don't remember specifically what's in subpart E, so please don't ask me. I deal mostly with subpart F now, the audit, and then obviously what's allowable and stuff like that, but I forget offhand what subpart E actually applies to. But the recipient and subrecipient must use these principles as a guide in providing, fixed price contracts and subcontracts when grants are used in determining the appropriateness. All right. Factors affecting allowability of costs. Clarified when allowable administrative closeout costs may be incurred. I don't know, I think for the most part, where most of your grants are coming from IDA and ESSA and some Perkins, a lot of times you don't have these administrative closeout costs. They are more, I think, these tend to come up more when we're talking about like our housing authorities and other types of agencies. So. And then prior written approval, removed items that no longer require prior approval. So here's a list of different, probably the only one that may apply to you is your equipment. And I think, I know you go through an application process for most of yours, and so you're kind of getting that prior written approval through the application process. I don't foresee the department making any changes around that, because that really helps as we're trying to ensure, as the state tries to ensure that you're spending the items on allowable costs. It really does kind of help with that process, so. Indirect costs, the de minimis rate. So one thing to note here is when we're talking about, I know it's IDA and ESSA. Donna, does that also apply to Perkins? That you can't use the de minimis rate? Okay, I couldn't remember offhand if they have the restricted rate as well. Somewhere's within 34 CFR, one of the education regulations specifically notes that you have to use a restricted rate for education grants. And so if you have to use a restricted rate, you're automatically prohibited from using the de minimis rate for those grants. So the only one that you may, this would become very, I think, a little bit wonky, and I think you would at least need to, first, to use the de minimis rate, you have to apply for an indirect cost rate. But the only one that this may apply to for you would be school nutrition, because it doesn't use the restricted rate. And I don't know that would necessarily, it wouldn't get you any more money. It would just help you, if you wanted to include, if you wanted to move money into, help pay for your office. then you could use the indirect cost for that. They did clarify that recipients and subrecipients have a right to negotiate a rate. The department has that already set up. I encourage anybody to use it. I don't know if Denise actually will actually want, oh, she's shaking her head no, so, okay, never mind. Clarified, recipients and subrecipients may apply for rates below 15%. Again, you would just go through the process with the department that the process already provides for a restricted and unrestricted rate. So if anybody wanted to go through that, I don't actually even know if it's you, Denise, so, no? Okay, all right. And then, so I did add in this note, and look, I knew that would come up, 34 CFR Part 76. Yeah?
I'll tell you who it is, if
Okay.
they want to know.
All right,
Sharon Allen.
okay,
She works under Nicole Dennis
okay.
in the DOE finance team.
Ah,
not
yes,
school
so,
finance.
so everybody should email Karen Allen today and want to apply for an indirect cost rate. If you wanted to lower your non-educational costs in your general fund budget, that's the way to do it. And then, yeah. Required certifications added language that when a subrecipient is applying for funds, requesting payment and submitting financial reports to the pass-through entity, it must certify that financial information submitted is complete and accurate. So there is supposed to, and I know a couple of our oddities ran into signing a separate certification. So that's actually supposed to be part of when you're applying for the reimbursements. That's part of what you're saying is that, hey, this information that I'm giving to you is complete and accurate. And then, again, change some language for consideration for selected items of cost, added language clarifying that the list is only a potential items of cost encountered under federal awards, but is not comprehensive list. Again, so when we're talking about this, if you were to open 2 CFR Part 200 and read it and go down to this subpart, there are a number of different items in there, and actually we'll talk about some of them, of different potential items of cost. And they will they specify within 2 CFR Part 200 whether that item is explicitly allowable or explicitly prohibited, or if there's some gray area. And I know if you were to go on to, I know ESSA has it on the state's website. They have a list of items for under ESSA, which again will based off from that and based on the regulation for the program, they go down through and tell you what items are allowable, not allowable, and where you might want to call them about asking if you can do that. So I wanted to as we this is kind of what it looked like when I mentioned before there was a red line document. This is kind of what they would do. So again, you can kind of see that a lot of what this was like a 1,000-page document, and I would say probably because they would have to include this whole paragraph when they made this change. All they changed was non-federal entity to recipient or subrecipient, because again, they didn't care about the subrecipient of the subrecipient from the federal standpoint. What they cared about was the direct recipient or the subrecipient to the feds. Again, so you can kind of see there's not really a lot of changes in there. They're really changing some terminology. Again, this is kind of similar. I will tell you, so from an auditor's perspective, has anybody actually read, and this is probably very small to read, but this is the standards for documentation of personal expenses. So I'm going to ask a question. I didn't put any questions in here, but I'll ask a question. Does anybody know what this relates to? the documentation of personal expenses.
Time and effort.
Time and effort. So, if you were to read this exact section in A87 or A133 or A21, they would use terms of personal activity report or semi-annual certification. You will notice that those terms do not exist in 2 CFR Part 200. So these are your standards for documenting what your people are doing. So I do tend to, from an auditor perspective, when I audit for personnel time, I don't necessarily ask for the time, what the state uses as time and effort document, a semi-annual certification or personal activity report. I ask for how are they being charged? What does their contract say? And then, so like which lines are they being charged to? And so if they are like an ed tech that maybe is getting paid hourly, then I'll look at their time card to make sure that they're being charged properly and that the expenses are allowable based on their, on what the district has said that they're doing. And then the same for a teacher, I'll look at the teacher contract, and you can get, and I'll look at the distribution reports. Because what it has to do is it has, like, so look at item 3, reasonably reflect the total activity for which the employee is compensated. Sorry, it's even a little bit small for me and looking at it from the side. But anyways, so, but a lot of what they made for changes, again, is the subrecipient and versus, recipient and subrecipient versus being a non-federal entity. They did make some other minor changes. But, so on to, I guess, which is more kind of what I tend to do now, which is our audit requirements. And so hopefully, somebody like Colin, this isn't gonna affect you, I'm sorry. But they increased the single audit threshold from $750,000 to $1 million in federal funds. So if you've kind of been on that cusp of that 750 to $1 million, so I will note this isn't going to affect your 25 audit, but it will affect your 26 audit. So as we're kind of, your audit that you're hopefully preparing for, it won't really affect whether you get a single audit for that year. Now, what may affect that is for those units that have only had to have a single audit because of the ESSER funds, you may drop off. But then we'll see some additional entities drop off once that goes to $1 million. And then they did added circumstances in which the auditee is responsible for ensuring contractors' compliance for procurement transactions. So that's just talk. So like as a auditee, there will now be instances where as you hire a contractor to do work, ensuring that they're actually following through on all. So I can tell you maybe one of the big ones that we saw as an auditor is around if you're contracting out for work and you have the wage rate certifications that need to be done. And so you may have been really good about having your contractor do them, but were you as good about ensuring that all of their subcontractors were also doing it? Because at the end of the day, that's still your responsibility to ensure that your contractors are following through with everybody that all the subcontractors that they're hiring are also doing what they need to do. Report submission, added language that a cognizant agency for an audit or oversight agency for audit may authorize an extension when the 9-month time frame would place an undue burden on the auditee. So, and this is going to relate to your FAC submission. I've never actually seen anybody get an extension, but there is, I guess, there's that provided language that it could happen. So the standards and scope, so the big thing is they clarify that the auditor must follow up on prior audit findings, regardless of whether the prior audit findings are related to a major program in the current year. So this kind of comes about when we're doing a major program determination. And last year we did, so big one would be ESSER, and maybe you didn't have your wage rate certifications done that we just talked about, so you weren't doing them. Well, ESSER is no longer around, and so maybe this year we're going to audit IDEA or ESSER or school nutrition, and we're not auditing ESSER anymore. As an auditor, if you had a finding in that last year around those Davis-Bacon certifications, or whether you call them Davis-Bacon or wage rate certifications, as an auditor, we're still required to follow up on that audit finding. So we still need, it's still part of our role to then go back, and even if you didn't have to do any more wage rate certifications, did you at least put the controls in place so that if it came up again, that you would be ready for it this next time? Oh, and actually I would have forgotten, and so good thing I put this note, JAQC, so this is who we went to the training with, clarified that this includes even if the auditee no longer requires a single audit. So you still require, so even if you drop below that $1 million threshold goes into place and you no longer need a single audit, as an auditor, we're still going to be required, even because you're still getting a financial audit, that we still need to ensure that you put those controls in place, and if you haven't, then you'll still get that finding in your audit. So again, the auditor must include the known question costs, by applicable assistance listing number, and federal award identification numbers, and how the question costs were computed. So anytime we're actually putting in question costs, we're talking about how many instances we saw, and then we'll talk about the money. And then sometimes there's an actual calculation that we did to get to those numbers. And so we're required that when we do that, when we have those findings, that we include that, how everything was computed. And then there are instances, actually, when there are known question costs, but the dollar amount is undetermined or not reported, a description of why the dollar amount was undetermined. So I could actually see this coming up again. We talked about wage rate certifications. You didn't do them. So now we know that there could be a question cost, there could be a question cost. And so there could be instances where if we don't know what the salary was, that we wouldn't necessarily know the total amount of the question cost. And so we would have to provide a description that said, hey, we know that there's this question cost, but we don't actually, there's no way to compute it. So, because you may not even have the salary documentation from the contractor, because maybe you didn't gather anything from the you just had the invoice that said, yep, we're going to pay you X number of dollars. And so you're not even able, as an auditor, we're not even able to determine what the question costs were. Okay. All right, so again, for question costs, that in the auditor's judgment is non-compliant or suspected, non-compliant with the federal. Again, so just more language about what a question cost is. I'm sure nobody here has any question costs, right? No? Okay, that's good. But so if you kind of want to go through the definition, and then, so likewise with the single audit threshold moving from $750,000 to $1 million, the base when we're determining whether it's a type A program or a type B program, we use that dollar threshold. And so that's also moving up to $1 million. I think that the only instance where that, actually we'll talk about modify the type A program threshold table to increase the first and second tier of total federal awards expended from $25 million to $34 million. And so I think there's probably only a few of you that this even applies to. So like I'm pretty sure this applies to Lewiston, where so normally your type A threshold is going to be $750,000. And for most of you, unless you spend over $25 million, your type A threshold is $750,000. Currently, if you were to spend over that $25 million, then there's a formula to actually calculate how much you have to expend in a program to have it be a type A program. That threshold is going to move from $25 to $34 million. So I know like Lewiston, because they're one of our clients, and the city gets quite a number of grants. It affects them. It probably affects Portland, maybe Bangor as well. But so it's a very small, and that's only because they're large municipal school districts. So even our largest, RSU 17 or RSU 6 that are large school districts, but because there's no city federal spending, it won't affect you. And so this just kind of really matters because if you're a type A program, that program has to be tested every 3 years. So you test it in year 1, as long as it comes up. So like, as long as there's no material weakness in that program, and there's a couple other considerations, but material weakness is the one that usually comes up as, so if we can consider that program as a low risk program in the following year, we don't have to test it again that second or third year. And then we have to test it again on the 4th year. When you're what's called a type B program, you're under that threshold, there's a lot more flexibility. You're going through and determining, is that program low risk or high risk? And there's a whole number of considerations to kind of make. It actually looks quite like a lot of the questions that are on there are very similar to what the state uses to determine whether a program is low risk or high risk. So tracking awards, will recipients and subrecipients need to track old and new requirements for their awards after, I was gonna put a question in here, wow. And then I didn't actually set it up correctly. Great. Track all the new requirements for their awards after October 1, 2024. And so yes, you're gonna have to, will need to track the requirements applicable to each awards. This is needed so that they're aware of the requirements they need to comply with, as well as provide to the auditor that is performing the single audit. And so this is kind of talking about the fact that early on in the presentation, we talked about the fact that Department of Agriculture has already put these changes into place, but Department of Education is waiting. And so there could be, some of these changes that we talked about won't apply to the Department of Education grants until July 1, whereas you can apply them to the Department of Ag grants already. Wow, I actually put more than one question in here, and I just totally. How will we deal with testing compliance when some awards will be subject to the prior UG and some the current UG? So you'll need to determine the uniform guidance criteria relevant to each award and test accordingly. The 2024 compliance supplement, okay. Again, talking about the same thing, as an auditor, we're also gonna have to work with you to determine which awards are using the old grant guidance and the new grant guidance. I'm suspecting many of you are probably still falling, because most of your grants are falling under Department of Education. You're probably still following the grant, the guidance has been in place for a number of years. I see Sherry shaking her head, so she is at least, and so, you know, again, where a lot of these changes are more wording versus substantive changes. I mean, you know, again, the biggest one is when are you going to use a single audit? What's the type of program? Your equipment? Some of those pieces. Those are really, I think, the biggest things. But there are some other things to kind of consider, especially if you were to apply for an indirect cost rate. I don't know if I've said indirect cost rate enough, so. I'm just trying to create more work for the school finance, or actually, it's not the school finance team. So.
Because you created more work for us, we passed it on.
Okay. That's a different discussion. I wasn't me. We were told we needed to do it. So, all right. So pass your agency awards. Ensure you're getting an award letter for every federal award. I think I said that a lot when I was at the department, but again, it's one of those things like, how do you even know what the requirements of the grant are if you don't have an award letter? That is what tells you everything about that award. Make sure to review the award terms. This is where, again, the department can apply stricter, or any of the pass-through agencies can, this is how they can apply stricter requirements because they have to be identified in the award letter. So I did put this in here as well, and so it's because as part of this, they did also increase the micro purchase threshold. Recipients or sub-recipients increased to the micro. Oh wait, sorry, this wasn't a change, but I did want to. I mentioned this, and so if for whatever reason you had a school board that was kind of open to allowing you to have a higher micro purchase threshold, there is a way to increase it to $50,000. But you do have to qualify as a low-risk auditee. You have to have an annual internal institution risk assessment to identify, mitigate, and manage financial risk, and it's for public institutions. For public institutions, a higher threshold consistent with state law. So it does have to be consistent with state law, and I don't precisely remember if the state law is lower. But so I essentially have a bunch of slides that have other information, but this was specifically related to the uniform grant guidance. Again, so if you have any questions, that's my email. Hold on, I'm gonna skip through. Somebody asked me to talk about one thing specifically. So just so you know, that was the actual presentation I was asked to provide. I have about 10 minutes. I'm gonna skip. I had kind of added a whole bunch of slides on here for some additional information. So as I talked about the uniform grant guidance, I figured I'd actually give you some more plain language explanation of the grant guidance. But I'm going to skip all of that. Okay. All right. But so one of the things that actually somebody had sent me an email and said, "Hey, can you talk about this?" Is as you guys have gotten all this equipment, or a lot of people have gotten equipment and assets with ESSER money, with the CRF money originally, with if you got equipment with the SLFRF money. So one of the questions that kind of came up was, well, how do we, what are the disposition as this equipment is kind of aging out? What are the requirements to get rid of it? So I figured it might be helpful to provide a definition for equipment and what's the definition for supplies. Again, these are right out of 2 CFR Part 200. Sorry. I thought I was a little further along. Oh, it's because, sorry. Wow. I was on the wrong part. Okay, so this is from the department's webpage, but it's also out of, I think it's in not 2 CFR Part 200, what's the other? I can't remember the other, that Bruman puts out. It's in their book as well. So it just talks about what's the criteria for equipment. So just making sure we're talking about the same thing. So management requirements for equipment. This is also another area we've seen some issues as well, is the management of equipment. So remember, if you buy equipment with federal funds, you have to keep a list of that equipment that you buy or assets. And that list of equipment has to have some particular information with it. So I do want to point out, so you have to have a description of the property. Never seen a problem with that. A serial number, not usually. And keep in mind, you will have some assets that don't have a serial number. So if you make improvements to a particular other asset, you might list that improvement separately. And so you may not have a serial number for all those. A source of the funding for the property. I don't always find that lists have a source of the funding. And it needs to include what the FAIN is. And so that should be able to be found right on your award letter. Who holds the title, the acquisition date, the cost of the property. Those aren't usually a problem, but again, because we're not always listing which federal fund, we also don't always list percentage of the federal agency contribution towards the original purchase. You usually don't have a problem with the location. Use and condition usually isn't a problem. And then any disposition data, including the date of the disposal and or sale. So again, a lot of times it does kind of come down to noting the fact that usually pretty good about knowing it's federal, but not usually the greatest about which federal fund and what the percentage of participation is. So just keep in mind, you need to have those on your equipment record. Keep in mind, you need to do a physical inventory every couple of years. So it says you have to do it every 2 years. And you have to have some sort of control system on how you're keeping that property safe, secure, and in good condition. And so this is kind of what I wanted to get to, but I wanted to kind of reinforce some of those other points as well. When we come to disposition application, so I split this into, because I wanted to specifically talk about ESSER and GEAR versus CRF and SLFRF. GEAR and ESSER are going to follow your traditional disposition requirements. If you continue to use the equipment or supplies, you're fine. And then, so once you're done with that equipment for the purposes of the grant, you may continue to use the equipment or supplies for an allowable purchase under another federal education program. So let's say you bought, and it's kind of hard because a lot of, if you look at IDA or ESSA or even CTE, the Perkins funds, those were all allowable uses under ESSER anyway. So if we were to look at GEAR, that may not be the case, but it would allow you to then transfer that equipment to another federal education program. So that would be your first option you would look at. And then you may continue to use the equipment or supplies for an allowable purpose under another federal agency program. So let's say you had equipment, maybe you bought a van under ESSER for whatever, and you're done with that purpose, but now you want to change it maybe to child nutrition. And so they would say that that's allowable. And again, child nutrition falls under Department of Ag, another federal agency, but they're saying that's an allowable transfer once you're done with it for the original grant. So also keep in mind, so the value that we're looking at, you bought it originally for over $10,000, and you may be depreciating that item, but as you depreciate that item, that's not what the federal government looks at, or that's not what the regulations look at for the value on if it's equipment still or not. If it's equipment or still or not is if the fair market value price of that equipment. So if you were to try to sell that item, is it still worth over $10,000? That's when, some other, and you want to get rid of it, that's when some other pieces come into play. So if you're gonna sell it and it's still considered equipment, in this case, the department is entitled to an amount calculated by multiplying the current fair market value of the proceeds from the sale by the department's share, a proportion of the cost of the original purchase. So if you go to sell the item, you need to talk to the, if it's with Gear Esser, you need to talk to the department first and talk about, look, I'm gonna sell this item. We still feel as though the fair market value is over $10,000, because essentially some of that money is gonna go back to the feds if you sell that item. So, and that's a lot of what this is talking about. So, and so the other thing that you need to talk to them about anyways is the fact of you are required to get disposition instructions from them on how you're actually going to get rid of that equipment. So if you're in that case, your first call, or maybe not your first call, but one of your first calls before, especially before you place that for sale anywhere, is you do need to talk to the department about disposition instructions. So, and I did kind of post, so this is more of the regulation. And again, so some more information around that. And then where I'm kind of pretty sure I'm running out of, I got 2 minutes. So I did want to talk CRF and SLR differences. So this is the money that's coming from that. So we could think of, I know currently it's 21.027, and I forget what the earlier CFDA, but that 21, it was a coronavirus relief funds that came. You got like, there was like 2 big buckets early on, and I think you had like 6 months to spend it, and then it did get extended. But anyways, the rules are different. If such assets are disposed of prior to December, so this is out of the Q&A that Treasury put out, is what they said is, if such assets are disposed of prior to December 30th, 2020, the proceeds would be subject to the restrictions of the eligible use payment from the fund provided by 601. But essentially, what would have had happen was you would have to follow your normal distribution requirements. When this kind of came out, and that I talked to Shirley Brown down in the controller's office, who was controlling the fund, who was in charge of the funds. Because it's silent as to what happens after that, you're allowed to sell that and retain any funds. So it does not follow the normal disposition. You don't have to get prior approval. You don't have to get disposition instructions. And so you see very similar language when we're talking with the SLFRF. A recipient may, during the period of performance, use property, supplies, or equipment purchased or improved with SLFRF funds for a purpose other than the purpose for which it was purchased, or approved as such other purpose also consistent with the eligible use requirements. If a recipient changes the use of an asset to an eligible use or sells the asset prior to the end of the period of performance, the recipient must follow the disposition procedures set out in uniform guidance, and it references that. But this is all talking during the period of performance. So make sure you look at the period of performance for SLFRF funds to determine when that end date is. If we're still within that end date and you're trying to sell assets or equipment that were bought with the SLFR funds, you need to follow the normal disposition. Once that period of performance ends, then they were pretty silent on what you have to do. So, and that is the end of, but there are some other things if you want to learn about internal controls. I threw some stuff in there, and it's just I tried to make a little bit more simple than what the Green Book says. It's still fairly, I didn't go into depth either, so I was able to make it a little simpler. Anyways, I know I'm at my time or maybe over, so.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks.
Who has a stump the Paul, not Paula the Stump, I realize I'm short, that's not what this is. Bridget understands, Maria understands. No, stump the Paula. So think about a question that might stump me in answering it. That's it. Oh boy. Talk about former members, all right.
Oh, wow, you had 3 former members.
3 former members.
Can a district, no, can a municipality have a petition to withdraw from the district within the parameter of their polling place on town meeting day?
Can a municipality have a petition to begin the withdrawal process from the regional school unit at the polling place on a voting day?
At their town meeting.
At the town meeting.
Have their town clerk sitting at it.
And have the town clerk sitting at it? That is a great question. Oh, it worked. Restart worked. My answer is this. You aren't stumping me, however, it's not part of Title 20A.
Right, that's what I thought.
It is municipal law, and so I would say, I'm sorry, you should consult legal counsel.
Yeah, that's.
I say that a lot, don't I?
Council's probably gonna say.
38.
All right.
Thank you, Tyler.
You're welcome.
We're gonna start, Denise is gonna start. So yeah, that's 30A. Best I can tell you is, talk to them. But any questions in 20A, related especially to 606B, I'm happy to help you with. Okay, the problem is now I've lost my files.
You've also lost your volume.
Because I'm not holding it close enough to my mouth. Good news is, I put all except items on here. You start talking, and I will bring it up because I have to now sign in.
Hello, everybody.
Hold it real close to your mouth.
Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Probably everybody knows me. I'm Janice Towers, school finance team.
Closer to your mouth. Closer to your mouth.
Sorry.
Hold it like this. There you go. It's the front part.
I've never been a singer. And you see people, when they sing, their mouth is on the mic, right?
Still not doing something right. You really have to do this. Yes, you can put on that one. See what I'm doing here? Just talking directly into the microphone like it's my best friend. Not that I talk to my best friend like that.
Is that better? I'm not as good as Paula, I'm sorry. Better? No. Better? How about now?
Stand where she's standing. We are so good at technical stuff.
How about this? I'm not a technical person either.
Just speak like you're talking to your kids.
You got green now.
I did all this earlier.
Hello?
Yes. Look at you. We can hear you.
No calling it up. How's that?
Oh, yes. Colin, you're okay, nobody look at my pen.
Did everybody enjoy their lunch? I did. Thank you for lunch. I appreciate that. We'll get going in just a moment. My slides are about MaineCare. Quick Q&A kind of thing on the most commonly asked questions. And then at the very end, I have a did you know slide, because I'm not sure that school folks know that there's some other stuff going on in MaineCare as well. So the good thing is my presentation isn't very long. Hopefully it'll give you some insight on a few things MaineCare related.
I had to restart. This was all set before, I promise you. I did this ahead of time. There you are.
Okay. Thank you, Paula. All right, so I've already introduced myself to you. I will let you know that I've been with the department since 2008. So it's been a long time. I love the work that I do in school finance. We have a great team. Makes it easy to come to work every day. The first question is the big one that I actually get asked quite often. Why should my district bill MaineCare for medical services that are delivered in accordance with an IEP? There's a short answer. The federal government pays a portion of the claim if it's billed to MaineCare, which is about 62%. So we would be accessing federal funds for medical services instead of local and state education funds for medical services. So that's probably the biggest reason to consider billing MaineCare. And then the other part is the cash flow that billing MaineCare provides. It just provides that circle of flow, whereas if you're not billing MaineCare, your expenditures for the services that you're providing aren't visible until 2 years later or allocated for 2 years later. So the Fed's paying for 62% of each claim sounds really good, and a little more cash flow sometimes can be helpful also to keep things going, especially if you're doing a lot of related services and such. The next question is, how can my district determine if it makes sense to financially to bill MaineCare? There is a lot of things to consider if you're considering this, but I think it's worthwhile to take a look at your district and see if it makes sense to do it. Determine your services that you need for your district. Sometimes you might start with a little service, maybe a speech therapist. Start there, just do speech services, see how that goes, see, and then maybe add on different things. So knowing what your services you wanna, that your needs are, then you look at the staff that it requires, the students that may be eligible for services. There's a link here to review MaineCare members by zip code. So you could go into this. I don't know if I can go into it now.
You should be.
Okay. And this brings you to a MaineCare member count document. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. This link tells you by city how many children in your city, town, are eligible for MaineCare or have MaineCare. It doesn't tell you who they are, but it gives you a big picture of, geez, I didn't realize we had that many kids that could potentially be billed to MaineCare, right? So this particular link was provided by MaineCare to us. I thought it was a really good thing for folks to even just take a peek to see where your district is, where your communities are within your district. Thank you, Paula. What kind of supplies are you going to need? What kind of oversight is necessary? You have to consider that there's a 38% seat assessment, right? You also have to analyze your administrative costs related to billing MaineCare. Review MaineCare and education training resources and complete online modulars. I would recommend that for anybody, whether you want to bill MaineCare or not. It's really very informative, but it gives you a bigger picture. And also review the MaineCare billing guide. And that can provide details, for example, how much does MaineCare pay for a 15-minute session of speech? I wouldn't know off the top of my head, but this is where you would go to find the information to determine if, with all of your different data sets, whether it would make sense for your district to bill out to MaineCare. Another question we get is, why am I seeing claims for services from prior years on my SEED report? There's a number of reasons that happens. Providers have 1 year to bill to begin with. So maybe a late billing situation, maybe there was issues, they took 6 months to bill it out. Maybe it was an adjusted claim. So a lot of folks think, oh goodness, is that a repeat from the prior quarter? Did they charge me twice for that? And I always go back to no. And the reason why is because the SEED report is set up to flow like this. For example, quarter 324 represents claims paid by MaineCare in January, February, and March of 2024. So we're about 6 months behind in our SEED, right? And then we, the DOE, doesn't recover the SEED costs until July. So we have quite a few intervals, if you will, of dates that flow. So if a claim was paid in January, it would land on the quarter 324 report. If it was reversed in February, or let's say a different quarter, you would see the reversal in the quarter in which it reversed. So you should always see the claim when it was paid. And I think you guys have a system to check into, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it, at MIMS or something, that you can go and look at your payments from MaineCare, and it literally will tell you when it was paid by MaineCare. And then you can expect to be able to trace that to a specific SEED report according to the date that it was paid. Folks have been asking a lot recently, why am I seeing credits on my SEED report? Recently, there was some rate changes made, and rate changes are retroactive, so I see folks reversing the original claim and then rebilling at the higher rate. Quarter 225, that's in process right now, has a lot of those on there. And also, if a claim was billed in error, the claim may be reversed, adjusted. There's a number of reasons that you might see an older claim or a credit on your SEED reports. What if I see claims for physical therapy on my SEED report, but the student does not receive physical therapy according to their IEP? PT and OT actually have the same description on the MaineCare SEED report, and that is because it is a federal coding description. Unfortunately, they do use the same code. I believe there is a different modifier maybe for them, but the description can only be one, and it happens to be PT. So sometimes folks immediately are like, my kid doesn't get PT. But if they get OT, it's fine, right? So PT and OT, you're gonna see the description as PT. Okay, here's the did you know. Did you know that MaineCare will soon be proposing a new school health related service rule, which is Chapter 106, allowing schools to deliver and bill MaineCare services regardless of whether they are on an IEP, as well as expanding the types of services schools can bill for. MaineCare also plans to undertake a rate study for several new services that schools will be able to bill for. And the big deal about this is, did you know that non-IEP related services that are billed to MaineCare are not seedable? To me, that's a big deal. I don't know as much about this section of the rule, the proposed rule that's going on. But from my understanding is that there's gonna be some services that your nurses do right now that could potentially be billed to MaineCare, which could open up a nice line to reimburse your local fund for your nurses' salary and benefits, or something of that nature. Something to provide a little bit of relief for the local budget. So I would like everybody to just be aware that when you hear about Chapter 106, definitely, if you have an interest in MaineCare billing, definitely do some reading on that. I don't know all the details, but I know that no seat assessed is a big deal. Your nurses are already providing some of these services, so that, it's almost like, I'm gonna say free money, if you will, because you're already providing the service, and nobody else is paying you except for your local. So does anyone have any questions about MaineCare that I didn't mention? Great.
For my own purposes, how many are currently billing MaineCare for MaineCare in your districts? That's good. Great.
Thank you, everybody.
So because I was busy hooking things back up, I didn't kind of explain the format that we're doing. So let me quickly go do that now, in case you didn't understand what we're trying to do. What we talked to MaineASBO about providing today are frequently asked questions. And so that's the format, frequently asked questions. So Denise just did frequently asked questions surrounding MaineCare seed. Maria is about to do frequently asked questions around coding. That's her area of expertise. And so, and then after that, Donna is gonna come up and provide some frequently asked questions around the funding formula, EPS. And then finally, Ida is doing frequently asked questions around, what are you doing now?
Section 3A.
Section 3A of the E279. So which one is yours here, Donna? Maria. I have a name issue. I don't remember names well, and I often use the wrong one, even people I work with daily, even people that live in my house. It's great. Okay, so, all right.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria. I'm still here. I survived you all. Yay! I'm just kidding. You were all very nice to me, and I appreciate that. It's more a presentation than frequently asked question, but you can ask question later. Let me discuss first the importance of quarterly uploads. The first one is data analysis and forecasting. Sometimes we need to pull financial data prior to the last quarter of the year to analyze or use in other processes to forecast and adjust funding without timely data. This cannot be done. And the next one is improve year-end accuracy. So this is to avoid the year-end report rush and be submitting, to allow your coding to submit your report with the correct coding and have it reviewed throughout the year to ensure it's ensuring cleaner files when your year-end reports are due and reducing the pressure of last-minute corrections. And number 3 is preparation for future requirements. As new initiatives are implemented requiring more detailed financial data, quarterly uploads will become mandatory for all. And this is, the example is the cohort. Eventually, all schools will be
The FAPE transition.
The FAPE transition. Sorry. Okay, so let's dive into the MaineASBO finance coding. The financial data is formatted as the string codes according to the coding handbook. So when you click the link here, it will lead you to the electronic handbook. So we recommend printing or saving it in Word document and make your notes when there are changes. You can use the Control F feature here if you're searching for keywords or a code, and it will lead you to what you're looking for. Oh, it's not showing the.
I can help you.
Sorry. Yeah, there you go. And then we'll go back. Yeah, so, yeah, use the Control F feature to search for keywords there. And why don't we go back, Paula? Okay, so accounting stream should tell a story. The fund is the revenue source, so who is paying for the expenditure? So that is your local fund, the state fund, and the federal fund. The program is what program is benefiting from the expenditure. That could be the regular, sorry. We can go to that one later. So the third one is the function. What is the purpose for the expenditure? The object code is specifically what is the expenditure. The cost center code for which school building location is this expenditure for. And here is the components of the expenditure. So we have, this is just a summary. So we have the fund, the program, the function, the object, and the cost center. And
I'm gonna remind of something real quick. I don't mean to interrupt, I'm trying to give guidance on exactly why this is important, Maria, to help you out with that. So for instance, you all just got an email from me yesterday about 2700 transportation. And the fact that, yeah, I see Mark's giving me 2 thumbs up. And the fact that if you want to know if your bus routing software is being funded in the EPS formula, it is, as long as you're using the correct coding. Okay, so you got an email on the listserv yesterday from us explaining that. That's why all of these codes are so important, because they directly impact how we calculate certain funding in the formula. So that's the whole purpose of all of this, and why Maria is learning and doing a great job of how to help you to make sure you're using the right codes.
I hope so.
You're doing a great job, Maria. Everybody agree?
Thank you. So, I forgot to mention on the previous slides that if you search the accounting handbook and you can't find a code or it's a new one, check the coding updates. It listed all the new codes there, the ones that's expired, and there's some new wordings to certain codes. And the very helpful is the chart of accounts. Like if you're looking for an idea or where does how do you code the transportation or regular instruction? It will give you what program code or function code, object code, and the cost center and description. So going back to the expenditure components. So this is the components of expenditure codes, which combine the elements I just mentioned from the previous slide. And that is the fund, the program, the function, and the object, and the cost center. And under each component, you'll find a range of codes with specific description. For example, under the fund code, you have the general fund, and then there's still a range of codes under general fund, same as the special revenue fund, and it applies to the rest of the components. The next slide is the revenue components and the balance sheets components. Revenue is a combination of fund and the revenue codes, and the balance sheet is a combination of fund and the balance sheet code. So, for example, you wanted to validate your coding combination. Just like go to maps and maintenance tab, and then choose the code combination validation, and enter like on the type field, just put in what you're looking for. For example, here the function and the object, and then you put the function code and the object, and it will give you, when you click the search, it will give you the result. So if there is a Y in the exclusion rule column, it means it is excluded and you cannot use the combination. But if you see an N, it means not excluded and you can use that combination together. If no results appear, assume that the combination will work, as there is no exclusion set in the system. So the next one is block file. If files are uploaded outside of the date range in maps, the file will go into block status. This means that the file is too early or too late according to the map schedule for that particular quarter. So you just reach out to me and I will unblock the file for you. This one is very important, especially now that we update maps to mirror the Q4 errors. So most of you who already uploaded might notice you have this error on your report. And just remember that salary and benefits must exactly the same except for the object code. So the fund, the program, the function, and the cost center should all be the same except for the salary line. The salary line should be the object code for the salary, and the benefit line is the object code for the benefit. Like, for example, you are coding the the teachers. So your salary code should be 1010, and the rest of the columns are benefits. So it should paired. It should be paired. And next slide. So we have some important announcements. As you all know, the Q3 started after March. The quarter started April 1st, and until the end of the month. And then we're still requiring SAUs in cohort to do the quarterly uploads. And I have included here the link for, if you needed the coding for those, it's in the pre-K special education, SAUP, FAP, that's the link. And I print out some hard copy there for the slides, but I think Paula will be sending this out to Joanne as well, so you guys can have it. The next announcement is, as I mentioned earlier, changes in business rules for quarter 3 reporting. So we replicate the, we have updated maps to reflect quarter 4 for quarter 2 reporting. This update is intended to address and resolve issues early to prevent a rush during year-end reporting. So you have already, for those who have already uploaded their quarter 3 files, you may have noticed these changes. The most common error, as I mentioned earlier, is the missing salary and benefit line. To fix this, just refer to the salary and benefit matrix from the previous slide. It's also in our website, or contact me for assistance. Accounting handbook updates. We're in the process of cleaning up and updating the accounting handbook. I've been working with program and grant managers to verify if funds are still active, extended, or expired. And we're also looking at consolidating redundant codes. So this is an ongoing, lengthy process. So stay tuned for a cleaner and clearer handbook. What's next? So just reminders as well that one of the tools Maine school administrative units use to ensure that you receive the sufficient funding is the financial accounting, just like Paula mentioned earlier, that it's coding, using the right codes will give you more money for your funds. Hopefully. And using codes appropriately at the local level is important. State and federal level reports are driven by the data provided to MEPS. And you are doing a great job. Your hard work providing good data enables us to use the best method possible in efficient allocating support to districts. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, email me, and I try my best to answer as soon as I can. That's all. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Maria. Good job. Or do you have it? Okay. So,
Just in case you forgot, this is how we do the funding.
So Paula mentioned earlier that this is a new thing for our team, is to stump the Paula. And the goal is to have Paula say, I am not 100% sure about that, but I'll look into it and get back to you. If we run out of time today, she's promised that she will incorporate it into our, what are they called?
Monthly office hours.
Monthly office hours. So there's a plug for our monthly office hours to stump the Paula. Which one is it? Oh. Did I go two? No. So my presentation is on the 8279 mainly, and some of the questions that we received on the 8279. One of the big ones we received is, why are not all of my people on section 1B? Why are they all not there? A big one is ed techs. I have 52 ed techs and my page 1 says I only have 20. The reason is page 1 is specifically to determine the operating cost of a school for regular education only. And that's very important to keep in mind, regular education only. The special ed techs should be categorized as special ed as they come into the special ed formula on section 3. And Ida will talk a little bit more about that. But if you have them, if you have your special ed techs on page 1 instead of for Ida's calculation, it could negatively impact your subsidy. So it's very important to have all of your positions, make sure that you have them in the right place. Another question on page 1 is, why don't we get support for system admin? Because they are part of regular education. Well, they are on page 1, but they're in section D for other supports. So positions that might assist with professional development, intra or extracurricular opportunities, system admin, all of those positions are in 1D, and those are a set rate per student. For system admin, that rate is $135. That is in statute, the $135. The others are calculated based on increasing the previous year value by the inflation factor. So on page 2, one of the big questions we get is on our economic disadvantage percentage. Where does that come in from the Magic 8 Ball? And what we do is we look at the number of economically disadvantaged students that you report in NEO, and we look at the number of total students you report in NEO, and we find the percentage of economically disadvantaged. So we divide the number of economic disadvantaged by the total number of students, and we do this for pre-K 8, 9, 12, and the total, and then we give you the highest rate. So on page 3, the question I will answer is on the bus allocation. And the question we get is the approved bus allocation that is part of the bus program, is that allocation subject to state and local share? And the answer is yes. All of the items on page 2 and 3 of the ED 279 are part of the state and local share. So if you receive an allocation for an approved bus through the approved bus program, that allocation will be on page 3, and it is subject to state and local share. Did I skip you? Yes, I did. I skipped that on our review too, didn't I? I don't know how to go back. Section 4 is valuation. Where do these numbers come from for valuation? We receive a certified list from the Maine Revenue Service every year. They provide us with a certified list. That list is also on their website, so if you want to go look, you can look on the website. And then what we use is either the most recent or an average of the most recent 3 years. So because valuations can fluctuate year to year and tend to go up, sometimes dramatically for some areas, we look at a 3-year average so that we are buffering that pain a little bit as much as we can. Now on to minimum contributor. Before we start, one of the key things we want to mention is this has been known as minimum receiver. We are rebranding that to minimum contributor because that is actually what is in statute, is the term contributor, and it actually reflects better what this actually is. So a minimum contributor is a town or municipality whose valuation times the EPS mill rate is higher than what they're actually required in their allocation percentage. So if your valuation times the mill rate states that you can pay all of what you're responsible for, then you don't receive a state share for that, and you're considered a minimum contributor. You give me an eye like you.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Okay.
Sorry.
Gotta watch out for her
I
eyes.
really wasn't, I was looking at
So in FY '26, 81 of the 252 SAUs will be minimum contributors. In FY '25, that was 84. And the number of SAUs went down because we had a reorg of 4 different enterprises going into one. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. You will get the slides so that you can look through them. There's a lot of information on all the slides. And I have tried to sort of spell out where everything comes from. This just shows you how it's calculated. It shows you that for Booth Bay, when we look at their valuation times the mill rate, it says they could contribute $7.1 million. What they're responsible for is just over, can't see it way over there. 4.2, thank you. So that means that they are actually able to cover the full amount that they are responsible for. But just because they're able to contribute that 7.2, they will never be asked to contribute more than what they're responsible for. So that number for the local responsibility is either the local ability to contribute or the local responsibility. It's the lesser of those two. So the first, these are all the adjustments that show up in 5A, section 5A of your 8279. And the first one is a debt service allocation adjustment. And what this is looking at is if you have a principal and interest debt service, state approved, local debt is not included in this, it's just the state approved debt. If you have debt, and we look at that and take that out of the total that you're responsible for and say, we're gonna look just at the debt. We're gonna calculate debt separately, and then we're gonna add it back in. So for Portage Lake, they have a debt of $163,000. They are currently responsible for $569,000. They receive a state share right now of $42,000, so they are getting a state share. And their valuation is just over $86 million. So with the debt service allocation adjustment, what we look at is say, we're only gonna look at that $163,000 first. And we're gonna say, we're going to multiply that by a specific debt service mill rate, which for FY '26 is 0.21. The next slide shows you how that 0.21 is calculated. Right now, I'm just going to say it's 0.21. You'll have to believe me for a few minutes. So we say the 163 times the 0.21. So looking at that, Portage Lake should only pay $18,000 instead of $163,000 because we feel the state should kick in some. So the remaining amount is what we're looking at as state share. So that is the 163 minus the 18, and you get 145. Keep in mind, no matter what happens, we always have to come up to that 569,000. That has to be covered either through state or through local. We have to get to that amount. So we look at that 145,000 that we're now saying the state should pay. We say, are they already getting 145,000? And when we look at their state share right now, it's only 42. So no, they are not receiving 145. They're only receiving 42. So that means that they should be eligible for a debt service. So then we have to also go back and look at, we took out the debt. Now we have to look at what is the operating cost allocation. So now for Portage Lake, their operating cost has reduced down to 405,000 because we took away 145. So now they're only responsible for 405. And we calculate a valuation amount by a reduced mill rate because we did the debt mill rate separately, so we don't want to double dip. So we take that portion out, the 0.21 is removed from the state valuation of 6.10. And when we calculate that out, it says, hey, Portage Lake can pay $508,000. And we just said they only have to pay 405. So, hey, they can cover it all. But no, we always go back to the lesser of those two. So either it's what you're responsible for or what you're able to contribute. It's always the lesser. So we find that now we have to get that 405 back to the 569. So we say, okay, state, you need to give Portage Lake 145,000. So what is going to show up on page 5A is the difference between what the state now has to pay and what we already gave them. So we subtract the 42,000 from the 145,000. So their debt service adjustment in 5A will be 103,000. And the little boxes at the bottom show you where we get all those numbers. All the numbers in colors come from section 4. And then in section 5, you can see that is the value that shows up in 5A. And this, in case you wanted to know, this is how the 0.21 is calculated. It's calculated every year, and it's based on the total state debt. And we say, of the total state debt, local share is 45%. Because state share is 55, local share is 45. So we determine what is the local share, and then we also look at the total state valuation. And the local share of debt divided by the total state valuation is the 0.21. And with Excel, there's always these little rounding funny things. So we have found that rounding to 5 decimal points usually gets us where we need to be. So in that debt, the reduced mill rate that we used is the 6.10, which is the mill rate minus the 0.21. Clear as mud, I'm sure. So again, this slide shows you that you may have, if you're in RSU, you may have some towns that are eligible and some towns that are not. And on 5A, the amount in 5A is the combination, the calculation of the total of the towns that are eligible. So for this district, I'm not going to say it because I'll say it wrong. Their total is $501,000. So the next one is special ed. This is the one that comes into play most often. The special ed calculation is a little bit more straightforward. First, you have to have subsidy. You have to be responsible for students to receive it. We take the minimum percentage, which is in statute, 50% is in statute. I have listed all the statutes on the side there. And the blue box is a link, so you can go right there and look at them if you would like. So what we say is the total amount of special ed that they're allocated times 50%. So the total amount is your special ed amount on page 3 in section 3A, plus your high cost average district is your special ed allocation. So for Brooklyn, that is 91,000. Times 50% is 45,000. And then we say, are you getting a state share already? Because we always have to look, are we giving you money already? And in section 5A, they are not receiving anything. So we say, okay, the 50% of 45 minus 0 means that they are eligible and their amount would be $45,000. And again, that's what shows up in section 5A. minimum state subsidy. This one is an either or. You get the higher of minimum subsidy or minimum special ed. You don't get both adjustments, you get one or the other, but you get the higher one. And what this looks at, it takes your EPS rates from section 1 for elementary and secondary, and it multiplies those by 5%. Again, 5% is in statute. And we come up with an amount per pupil that is 5% of what page 1 is. And then we go to section 2 and we say how many the 2-year average of subsidy students that Portage Lake has. So for them, they have 22 elementary and 10 secondary subsidy students, which is again 2-year average. And we multiply those numbers by the 5% calculation above and come up with a 5% value of the total value is 12,000 together. So we look at Portage Lake and we say, okay, Portage Lake is already getting 42,000. We just talked about them. Is 42,000 greater than 12,000? And the answer is yes. We're already giving them more than the minimum subsidy. So they are not eligible for a minimum subsidy. We do have a couple on here who are. One I want to point out is, did I put them on there? No, they still have, I think they're on the next page. So one thing I wanted to point out is if your minimum special ed is higher, then you get the minimum special ed. If your minimum subsidy is higher, you get the minimum subsidy. How that would show up on your 8279 though, if you receive minimum subsidy and you receive minimum special ed, is on 5A, you will see the total amount of special ed subsidy. So you'll see 100% of your special ed subsidy. And then to make up the difference, the minimum subsidy would be that the difference between the two. So if you get both, you're going to see your special ed is going to be at 100%. To make up the difference, you'll see a smaller amount on the minimum subsidy line.
Tony, you have a question?
Go ahead, sorry.
So can you go back a slide?
I can try, yes.
Okay, so I'm the third column. So the state share before adjustment, section 5A, 1.3 million. So can you explain that? Because none of the other towns have that, and that affected our special ed.
None of the other ones were eligible for state share. They did not get anything for state
So
share.
can you explain that? Like, so 2 of my 3 towns are minimum and 1 town gets state share. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to tag me in?
Sure, you can go. See, you created this table.
Yeah, so in your case, some of your towns are at the mill rate cap, and they are not a minimum contributor. Your other towns, and I don't remember how many right now, we could look it up, but you have at least one town that is contributing below the mill rate cap, which is why it's a minimum contributor. They get the amount they're able to contribute is higher than what they're actually responsible for. So they're below the current mill rate cap of 6.1 in FY26. 2 of them are. Okay. As a result, how many towns are in your district?
3.
Okay. So 1 is at the cap, and 2 are below the cap. Okay. So the one that's at the cap is eligible for $1.3 million in state funding over and above what they're able to contribute, because the amount they're responsible for minus what they're able to contribute is the amount of state share that comes to the district as a result.
On their behalf.
On their behalf. But remember, you're a combined district, so all towns benefit from any state funding. So yes, but on their behalf, because they're at the mill rate cap. The other 2 that are below the mill rate cap, because for whatever reason, they probably have lesser students, And so their amount that they're responsible for is lower than what they can afford. They probably have high valuation and lower students, et cetera. So because of that, they're not technically getting any state share. What Dawn has been showing here are, because everybody gets something, the adjustments that are provided to those that are minimum contributors and are not receiving either very little or no state share before these adjustments are done. So we do the adjustments and we say, okay, 866,000 is the amount that is eligible for an adjustment for those two towns that aren't receiving any state share yet, because they can already contribute the whole portion.
So, so you said you get either 50% of special ed or the state share, whichever is greater, right? So
That's, no, not exactly. You're still getting the 1,359 state share that you were getting before, plus now we're also adding 866,000, which is not a full 50%, but the 50% comes to 2.26, right?
Yep.
So we take minus the state share you were already getting, and then to get you to that level,
Yeah.
we're adding the additional
So
866.
that's what I was gonna say, the minimum special ed is more than the state share, so ultimately we get that, but it's split between the two.
Right, sorry, I heard it differently, but you were saying the same thing.
Yep.
That happens a lot. Make sense, kinda? I know. But again, what this does, and I don't know if it's shown on here, so the mill rate that those two towns are actually contributing initially was already below 6.1. Now, when we do this, they're even contributing less, and so the mill rate goes down even more. So while most of the state is contributing at that mill rate of 6.1, every town that's a minimum contributor is contributing less than that mill rate gap towards the education in their district.
And we have tables, Paula's created tables with all of these formulas in there. And when I share the slides, I will also share that table so you can see the Excel version with formulas.
And see how they.
And if you weren't lucky enough to be one of the 4 people here, you can put in your information to see how that calculated.
Very few get this one, just for
Right.
commentary.
Yeah.
Very few get this one. It's the least that you can get of all the minimum contributor adjustments available.
So there is also 11 towns that have this special ed RSU adjustment. And the reason that these towns receive this is because back in 08-09, they were eligible for a special ed minimum adjustment. And they did not, state legislatures did not want to hurt these 11 towns. So they said, even though you're joining RSU, we're still gonna let you have your minimum special ed adjustment. And Ida can talk a little bit more about her feelings on that. So to calculate this though, there is a percentage. What they look at for minimum special ed, again, we take the total amount in section 3 of your special ed and your high cost out of district. But for each town, we're only going to look at the percent of that they are, would be there. So to do that, we look at the total number of subsidy counts in section 2 and multiply that by the percent of students that they are actually, the towns are actually responsible for. So for the first one, they're only responsible for 2.5% of the pupils that are subsidized in RSU 1. So instead of looking at the full amount on section 3, we take the full amount and multiply it by 2.5. And then that is what we multiply by 50% to get the 77,000. Right now, they're not getting any state share, So the difference between the two is 77,000. So again, these are only these towns that are within those RSUs that are listed there. Minimum economic disadvantage adjustment. We get a lot of questions around this. The disadvantage, there is a disadvantage rate for the state, which is an average of everybody's disadvantage rates. And for FY26, that's 52.43. So the first thing we look at is say, what is your disadvantage rate on section 2? And if your disadvantage rate is more than the state rate, then you're eligible. If it's not, then you're not eligible. So that's the first check. So if you are eligible, your amount, your percentage will be higher than the state percentage. And again, for FY26, that's 52.43. So you can look down below. Vinyl Hayden is above. They operate a school. You must operate a school. And then the third criteria is you must also be eligible for either minimum subsidy or minimum special ed. So those are the three criteria. You must, A, have a disadvantage rate higher than the state. You must operate a school. Not just be responsible with students, you have to operate a school. And you have to also receive a minimum subsidy or a minimum special ed. So if you get a yes to all three, then yes, you are eligible. And what you receive for the economic disadvantage is the disadvantage totals from section 2. And that is the amount in section 5A. So again, down whiting, we're just showing, those are the 6 values that equal the 33,000. And those values again are in section 2, and they are for the, section 2 has 2 sections with economically disadvantaged. The top one is 0.15, the bottom one is 0.5. So we have to add those all together to get your total economic disadvantaged. And that's just showing you where they show up on page 2. Again, it's all 6 of those values added together. So that's it for those adjustments. And this is the other one that we've been getting questions about because it's really new. And this is the multilingual hardship adjustments. When this first started, I was not part of the team. It was a little bit harder to calculate. You had to request it. It was a lot more complicated. And so it was changed, so now it is much easier. We have a lot of information on our website under the multilingual hardship, and that is the law, Public Law 2023 is where it comes from. So now you are eligible. If you are eligible, you do not have to do anything. We are automatically going to determine A, if you're eligible, and B, how much you will receive. And to receive these funds, you must have a 3% difference between your original allocation. So in FY25, in section 2, your multilingual allocation, what is there for FY25, was calculated on October 1, 2023 student counts. And because so many multilingual students seem to migrate in after those counts, and they are there sitting in your seats for FY25, we look at the FY24 count, because those are the students that are actually with you right now. So we take the FY24 counts and multiply those just like we did when we determined your first original allocation. We do the same exact calculation. And that's where the 3% comes in. It is not based on student counts. It is based on your multilingual allocation in section 2. So if you look here, down in the middle, we see that the original allocation was $439,000, And when we take the new counts and we say now, in October 2023, for students in pre-K, they had 0, they still have 0. In K-8, they had 69, but now they are up to 100. So they have received more students, 31 more students, between when we calculated your FY25 amount and now when you actually have those students there. So we take that for K-8 and we do it for 9-12. And it, again, it's calculated just the same way as when we do the original calculation, which uses your per pupil rates from page 1. So once we get those totals, we say, okay, is 623,000 at least 3% more than 439,000? And we divide it out, we look and we say, yes, it's 4.2%. So yes, this school is eligible because it's over 3%. So again, the question we get is on the counts. It's not based on the counts, it's based on the allocation. So if they're eligible for the multilingual hardship, we have to figure out how much of that difference that the school is going to receive. So in order to do that, we need to come up with a percentage. What is the percentage of the state share that we should use for this multilingual? So in order to do that, we have to take their original total allocation and we have to add in that additional multilingual hardship amount of 183. So we come up with this higher amount of 29 million. So we take the 29 million and which is the new state share, and we say what was the school actually responsible for? And for Augusta, that was 12 million. They're still only responsible for 12 million. The total allocation now is 29 million. So when you subtract the 12 million from the 29 million, you get 16 million. So then we say, okay, we have 16 million. If we divide that by the total, that means 56.11% of the total is state share. So the state share now is 56.11, which state usually pays 55. So if the state share is less than 55%, if the new one, if that 56 was 46, we would use 55. So anything that's 55 or below, we use 55. If the amount is higher, we use the new amount. So for Augusta, that new amount is 56.11%. And we take that percentage, we multiply it by that difference in multilingual hardship, and that is the amount they will receive of $103,000. So that's what they received for their multilingual hardship. And again, you don't have to do anything. If you're eligible, you receive an email from me, and it says, yay, you got more money. So,
I just want y'all to know, we didn't come up with that calculation. The statute.
Yes.
Whoever wrote the statute decided that's how we're doing it, not our plan, just so you know. We wouldn't have made it that complicated. The end?
That was it. That was me.
Good job.
I only had the phone in front of once.
That was awesome.
Oh, public did bring her 8 ball, so again, if we have time at the end, she can answer your questions.
Thank you.
Get yours from the
Okay. How's everyone doing? It's like math class, extended math class.
Yaris? Hello, I'm Ida Batista. Those that don't know me. So I'm here doing the ED 279
3A bits, and I sort of love these bits because they're based on the actual information that you have in there. So there is some calculation, but it's a lot of information that really just comes from you, and I appreciate that, so. So this is the question we usually get. Why is this section A bit, 3A bit, less? Why is my allocation less? The bits that are in section 3A are gifted and talented, special ed, high cost out of district, special ed, and transportation. And so I wanted to list out for you some places to look because, as I said, the calculations use your information. So for gifted and talented, it's your prior year, so the year that you've just completed, program 4900, general fund, budget expenditures from Q1, and Q4 actual expenditures for program 4900. What we see here is that we say, I got an allocation, I had X amount of dollars last year, now it's 0. How did that happen? We've spent for gifted and talented. And I'll say, well, I've got your budget as having 0 expenditures. No, I submitted my budget. It's like, okay, did you approve your budget? What? Did I approve my budget? It's like, if you don't approve your budget, the data doesn't get migrated, which means that that's going to show up as a 0, which is usually what happens with gifted and talented. There have been a couple of times where something has been missed, so I really recommend check that data first. For your special ed, it's going to be your special ed enrollment, your prior year and your current year. Students, K-12 only. If you are in a cohort, we've been trying to stress this a lot, pre-K special ed, separate fund. We are trying to keep that money out, that it's 2213 is the fund. The state is paying for it at 100%. Right now, that's what statute says. So those kids, they're out of any EPS formula. So the K-12 special ed enrollment, and you want to look at your general fund, special ed expenditures and revenues. I will get to those a little later, but you're comparing, like, did you have about the same amount of students? Did you spend about the same amount of money? For high cost out of district, it's current and prior year placements and the associated general funds associated to those placements. For transportation, you're looking at your prior year general fund, function 2200. 20 cents. What did I say? 22?
Don't listen
Scratch
to her,
that. 2700 series. With the exception of expenditures, we do net out revenues as well. The formula for transportation is we take your prior year allocation, we inflate that by CPI, and then we look at your net transportation expenditures. We do 90% of those and 105. You will never get less than 90% nor more than 105% of your expenditures. So wherever your inflated allocation falls in, if it falls in between, that's what you'll get. If it's less than 90% of your expenditures, you'll get the 90%. If it's more than 105%, we're going to pull it down to 105. But these are the areas where I say, if you're seeing a reduction that you don't expect, these are the places where I expect you to start looking. Because we had a district say, our transportation looks super low. It's like, okay, I looked at your expenditures, this is what I'm seeing. And it turns out they had a bus in there. So it's like, sorry, we don't pay for buses in transportation. That's a separate place. So tell me more about special ed and high cost out of district. Get this a lot. So I want to talk about, I wanted to talk about things. This is the section of law 15681A. It's item 2 that talks about special ed and high cost out of district. There are 5 components to the special ed allocation. So there's the prevalence, a base, a prevalence, a high cost in district. I wanted to, as Tyler would say, I would have redlined that piece. It's broken. We know it's broken. Because it just does an inflated factor. And then there's what is in statute called a maintenance of effort, which those 5 components equal special ed, which is your line 3A2. High cost out of district. It's associated and interacts with that line above. It's related. It has its own allocation, which they put in, which is based on student placements and associated threshold levels. Let's see if I missed anything. So we're going to tackle the high cost out of district first. So there's, right now, actually, the 214 is open. Your initial allocation comes from the EFS 07, which is your prior year placements, all placements for tuition and board only, no related services. It's open in July 1, so if you want to jump on it, please do so. It ends, we close it on October 15th. October is a busy month, so if you can jump on it, please do, because we then need time to review the data, make sure it looks reasonable, and then start our calculations. The spring adjustment, which is when we look at your current year students, this is your 214. It opens March 1st, closes the 15th. That's a hard close because we have to make that adjustment before the year ends. So if you don't have the data in, we can't give you the adjustment. So unfortunately, we have had some SAUs come to us late in June and July saying, I didn't get my data in. Can we do something? And we can't, because that fiscal year is closed. And that is current year students. That means we are expecting you to estimate your last quarter. We would figure that you've gotten invoices for the first 3 quarters and that you're going to estimate, and it should be now that I believe before it used to be on attendance, now it's a daily rate of enrollment. And so we'd expect that to be fairly consistent, and you should be able to predict that fairly steadily. Both look at the student placement costs above a threshold. So if it's private placement, it's 4 times, public is 3 times, regional is 2. Let's see, guys. So one of the things that I'd like to say that just came up recently, so these reports are supposed to be filled out by your special ed director, and then you as business managers are supposed to confirm up the data and the costs and make sure that elementary and secondary costs, and whether it's federal or local, are okay. So you're supposed to certify, confirm the data and certify. If your special ed director, or you for that matter, is out for an extended period of time doing these surveys, you're to call the help desk and they will work with you to get someone, say your superintendent, assigned to facilitate filling out and certifying these reports. So if that happens, there's a solution for that. Let's see. So the other thing people don't ask is, well, why are we adjusting? We're adjusting because we assume that these high-cost in-district students that you have may come in, and you may get a student that has a need that you weren't anticipating or budgeted for. And we assume that this could be a cash flow issue. So we're making a spring adjustment because we don't want to see anybody get into trouble. It's not moving. It's broken. Okay. So I gave you an example. So how do we do the high cost out of district? It doesn't matter which of the reports it is. we have a state special ed per pupil rate. This is when I'm calculating special ed and I do the base rates and the prevalence rate for the state. We add those two, what those two numbers come up to. We divide it by the number of special ed students in the state that are not state agency clients or state wards, and we get a figure. And we say, okay, the placements are 4 times, 3 times, 2 times are based on that number. So as an example, I have a SAU here, they have 5 special ed students, and we have their cost. And I just limited to federal and local. Any federal costs, we are not including because you get that money back from the feds, so we are not gonna account for that data again. We're not gonna account for those funds again. So there's no additional money for that student in the high cost special out of district line. For student 2, they are underneath the threshold because they would need to have gotten to 30,000. For lines 3, the threshold is 40,000, so that means that you've gotten, so the high cost out of district for that student would be $15,000. For line 4, because they're in a regional program, the threshold is 20,000, so there's a $15,500 out of district allocation for that student. The last student is at 40, there's no additional funds above that, so we leave that. So right now, astute SAU has an out-of-district adjustment that would be $30,500. So the difference between these two, so both what we just did, or that small example, we do that for both surveys. However, the adjustment is the difference between what your 07 says and what your 214 says when I do that, summation of your placement students. So if, so a SAU had initial allocation of 30,005, if their 214 data was 24,000, they'd get no adjustment. However, if it was 34,500, they'd get $4,000. So you'd see their high cost out of district would be $34,500. And we don't take away. So if we've given you the allocation of that 30,500, even if your current data says that you're only spending about 24, we're not going to take away any allocation associated with that. Okay. So let's get to sort of how is it related to special ed? So I realized I wanted to make a distinction between the allocation and the special ed formula. So the special ed formula looks at 4 pieces. It looks at your base, which is that 1.5 times your times a specific your SAU specific weighted EPS rate. So it looks at your elementary students and their rate, and your secondary students and their rate, and we do a weighted average so that way you can have a specific EPS rate, and then it multiplies it times your special ed students below 15% of the prevalence. Then there's a prevalence component, which is 0.38 times that EPS rate, that specific special SAU EPS rate, times the number of students that are above that 15% prevalence. Size is for very, very small special ed programs, less than 20, and that gets a weight of per pupil weighting of 0.29, and then as I said, there's this high cost in district, which again is broken. Like if you didn't get that when the formula initially came out, you're not getting it, and we know it's broken. So that gives you a formula amount, right? Okay, so now we go to, is the formula amount reflective of your expenditures? And this is where maintenance of effort comes in, and it's in statute, the 15681A, number 2, and I believe it's D, is it, and it says that we have to make an adjustment, and it's associated to the federal maintenance of effort, in the sense of like, we wanna make sure that you're getting enough revenue. That's really what it's looking at, and it says that we have to see if the model reflects. We already know, and if anybody didn't know, I'm sure you do, that the model right now is not doing a good job reflecting expenditures. And what happens is, it's getting picked up in this adjustment. The model is under review right now. They're hoping to make some adjustments to it and make it better, but right now, this is the model we have. So what the maintenance of effort adjustment does is it says, let's look at your prior year, where the year that finished, where you're either in the midst of the audit, but you closed the books on it. It looks at those expenditures, special ed expenditures. It nets out any revenue you might have received, and we net out your high cost out of district allocation. So that 30,500 that a student got, we're netting it out of this. And I want to mention that again, because when we get calls, or I get calls that say, hey, I forgot a student in my 07, it's still in, their expenditures for that student are still in the special ed component. So that means that when I recalculate your high cost out of district, I have to recalculate your special ed line. So they're related, and it's because we can't distinguish a dollar, right? We can't tag a dollar to a student. So they're in, even if you've missed that student in the high cost out of district allocation component, they're still in the special ed. So what we do here is as I said, we create a prior year special ed rate specific to your district based on the number of students you had and what your net special ed expenditures. We then use that per pupil amount and we multiply it by your current year special ed students to see what would be the MOE value, right? And then we take the lesser of either that multiplied value or your net expenditures, and then we compare it to your formula amount. And if your MOU value is greater than the formula amount, then the MOU adjustment is the difference, else it's 0. And so this is my last slide. So we're going to walk through the student SAU. I'm giving you their value of $7,500,000. Their prior year special ed student was 100. They spent $1 million. Is their expenditures, and they for the current year, they have 97 students. So prior year revenue was 100,000, and as I said, they got the high cost out of district allocation at 30,500. So their net special ed expenditure is 869,500. When I divide that number by their 100 students, it's giving me a prior year per pupil rate of 86.95. When I times that 86.95 to their 97 students, it's saying that essentially they should be spending about 83,415. And that's the number, since it's less than your 86.9, because you've lost 3 students, that's the number I'm going to use. And then I compare that number to your initial formula amount. So that means that you're getting a 93,415 MIU adjustment, which makes your special ed allocation 843,415. So this is to show you, one, how we get there, these are the steps, and that your high cost out of district is completely, utterly ensnared in your special ed.
So why do we separate it?
Why do we separate it? Because statute says we have to.
There you go.
Because there's a different formula for that. So, that was it. Questions, complaints?
Give them the call.
For you, for you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you to the department. Are there any questions for anybody before we, of either the department or of me or of ASBO? You know what I'm going to tell you. If you liked today, let us know. If you didn't like today, let us know. Some people have come up to me with comments or questions during breaks and stuff. I value that and I appreciate that. So thank you for those who did that. If that's not your thing and it's more of an email, that's welcome too. So let us know what your thoughts are, what you'd like. I don't know what Joanne has coming up. We are doing some lunch and learns before the end of the year. This is our last in-person. I'm hoping to see you all in Whitefield, New Hampshire on the 21st to 23rd of May. Hope you can make it. And let us know before the end of June, which is when we hold our board retreat, what you want for the upcoming year. If there's nothing else, have a safe journey and hopefully the weather improves more than what the weather really says. Take care, folks.
Thank you.